Okay, well, good morning. My name is Mike Albrecht, and I would like to welcome all of you to TuCare's 20th Natural Resource Summit. And the most important item on our agenda is going to happen right now. If you would bow your heads with me, we'll have an invocation. Dear Lord, we are thankful for your presence here with us today. Thank you, Lord, that this fire's out. We're thankful, Lord, that nobody was killed fighting this fire. And those that were injured, we pray for their speedy recovery. For those that lost property, lost homes, we pray for your comfort, Lord. As we move ahead, we just ask that you give us wisdom and show us how to restore land that's not public, it's not private, but it's your land. We're your stewards. Show us, Lord, what to do. Give us your wisdom. Unite us in an effort that pleases you. We lift this to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Thank you. Now, before we start the program, I want to offer our collective praise and thanks to all the men and women that helped fight the RimFire. This includes our agency folks from the U.S. Forest Service, from CAL FIRE, from the Bureau of Land Management, and from firefighters that were across the United States. I think there were 41 states represented by the different firefighters. These folks are truly professional firefighters, and they did an excellent job at putting this out. But I'd like to include some recognition for who I'm calling some unsung heroes. This group was mobilized to try to protect their private forest land and the adjacent public lands and communities that were endangered. The first fire lines they built were overrun. Did they evacuate? No. They fell back and built new lines that were overrun, and they fell back again, until they were able to build a 13-mile fire line that did hold. This line cut over the top of Duckwall Mountain, across the Cottonwood Road to Fahey Meadow, proved to be an invaluable anchor point for firefighting. The job was dangerous, it was dirty, and it was grueling. The heroes I'm speaking about are our local Sierra Pacific foresters, who called our local timber operators and said, hey, we got to get this job done. The timber operators showed up, not asking how much they would get paid or complaining that their logging jobs were being interrupted. They showed up to protect our homes and our forests. So I'd like to give special recognition to these men and the wives that supported them at home, praying for them. The list includes SPI foresters Ken Fleming, Steve Kafka, Roger Peterson, Matt Reno, Mike Vasilla, Matt Waverly, Brian Whalen, Aaron Smith, Tom Adrell, and others that I'm sorry I've missed. It includes their fearless leader, Tim Tate, who led the charge. It includes 10 to 12 dozer operators, lots of timber fallers, and several low-bed operators moving equipment. The work they did was outstanding, as well as all the additional work done by the agencies. Let's give a round of applause to the fire professionals and these unsung heroes. Okay, the next thing I do on these programs is recognize our dignitaries. Unfortunately, this has been a very tough week for everybody involved in this, so I have no list of dignitaries, and I see them out there. So if you're a dignitary, please stand up. I actually kind of tend to agree with this. No, there's some folks out here that I see Susan Skalski's here from the Stanislaus National Forest, and Chris Scow. Sorry, Chris. Well, yeah, that's right. You're not saying, but thank you, folks, both of you, for being there and the hard work you and your staff have done. We've got several county supervisors here. I know Sherry Brennan's here, and Carl Rotifer is here, and Connie Williams is here from our Planning Commission, and some other politicians are going to speak here pretty quickly. And I know there's some great folks from CAL FIRE here, and hey, if you're dignified, thanks for being here. Give them all a round of applause. Our next thank you and recognition goes to the one person who oversees and organizes the whole Natural Resource Tour and Summit. She also organizes every other aspect of TuCare. Her energy is endless, her commitment to our cause is unparalleled, and her heart's as big as this room. She is our executive director, and that's Melinda Fleming. Let's give her a round of applause. Her right-hand ladies are Charlotte Haig, Kayla Barnes, Kate Crook, and Rory Wiley. These ladies are all the TuCare board members. They are all TuCare board members, and they serve behind the scenes, dotting the I's and crossing the T's. We have several other board members here. I don't know if Roger, our president, are you here, Roger Stevens? Not here today, okay, well, just thank you to all you folks in TuCare that put this all together. It's well done. Before we move on to our speakers, I'd like to close with two thoughts about the RimFire. Last week, one of our timber fallers cut a large burned tree that was a hazard to the road. When it hit the ground, a large object rolled from the tree. It was a dead bear. This bear died clinging to the top of the tree. It had nowhere else to go. A few days earlier, a sheriff's deputy patrolling Cottonwood Road encountered a bear crawling along on its elbows. Unable to walk because its paws were so badly burned, he put it out of its misery. The riparian areas along many creeks and drainages are incinerated and have nothing left alive. No plants, no insects, no frogs, no toads. Over 50 known spotted owl nesting sites are gone. Ranchers have asked the loggers to look for dead cows and to please cut the bells off their necks. We hear a lot about defensible space around our homes. My question today is, shouldn't we also create a lot more defensible space in the forest for the animal and plant life that call the forest their home? My final thought is this. We hear a lot about large natural disasters around the country. Tornadoes, hurricanes, tidal waves, floods. The results of each of these disasters is very tragic. But when the winds die down and the water recedes, the communities always band together and they go to work, restoring their property and their land. The RimFire is our tragedy and will leave a huge scar in our landscape even beyond our lifetimes. But the smoke is now cleared. It is time to go to work, restoring our national forest, our national park, and the rivers that provide water and power to so many people. Let's make sure our story is one of unity. Let's stand united to restore the land that has been burned, and to work even more diligently on our green landscapes so that something like this doesn't happen again. So with that, I would like to move into our program, and we'll do so with, I think our next speaker here, are actually going to help open the program, is our supervisor, Sherry Brennan. She's going to lead us in a flag salute, and then I think she has maybe a special audio or something. You'll tell us about it. Sherry Brennan.
Thank you, Mike. Now I've done it. I'll just hold it. Occasionally, when I say the Pledge of Allegiance, occasionally, I take those words for granted. And so if you would indulge me for just a moment, I would like to play an audio of one American's interpretation of the Pledge of Allegiance.
each bearing its own stamp of individuality. People, 200 million strong. People who have come to work from all corners of the earth. A land of laws with an ingenious system of checks and balances that allows no man to become a tyrant and lets no group prevail if their power is not tempered with real concern for the government. A land where the right of dissent and free speech is jealously guarded, where the ballot box is the sword and the people its wielder. One nation under God. A land where freedom of worship is a cornerstone of her being. A land graced with temples and churches, synagogues and altars that rise in profusion to embrace all the religions of the world. Indivisible. A land forged by hot steel and raw courage, informed forever by the awful crucible of civil war. With liberty. Where man in pursuit of an honest life will not be denied his chance. Where her citizens move freely within her vast borders without hindrance or fear. A land brimming with opportunity, where freedom of choice is the guideline for all. And justice. The courts of our land are open to all. Its wheels of justice grind forth. All causes, all people. They look to every avenue for justice, every concern of the law, and they temper their reasoning with mercy for all.
Now, if you would all stand and please join me in a salute to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Sherry. Sherry's our District 1 supervisor, and boy, if you don't know her, get to know her. She's a fine, fine lady. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. He is here sitting in actually for our congressman who got stuck in D.C. doing, I guess, what we'll call the people's business. I'm sure it was very, very important because he really wanted to be here. But we have, in his stead, we have Rocky Deal, who's his chief of staff. And Rocky did not leave me a bio, and I'm actually kind of thankful for that, looking at some of these other bios are very long. So Rocky I said, Rocky, I got to say something. And he said, well, tell him this. He was a commanding officer. He was in the Navy. He was a commanding officer of the USS Constellation. That's a aircraft carrier. So Rocky commanded that. Prior to that, he flew Tomcats. I don't know if those land on a carrier or not, but they probably do. Yeah, they do. Okay, if you're lucky. And he's here he lived through all that, and he's here to tell us about some legislation and things that the senator, or a congressman, excuse me, would like him to say. I'm sure. So Rocky Deal, round of applause.
So make it clear, I'm not Congressman Tom McClintock. I'm referred to as a young, buff, good-looking one. At least I refer to myself that way. Probably going to have to stop frosting my hair, though. No offense, Mike. Congressman McClintock very much wanted to attend this forum. He attended a year ago, and he not only spoke, but he listened carefully to what went on during the proceedings, and really admired what this organization stands for and what it's doing. TuCare is an organization which works diligently advocating for the kind of policies and practices which not only conserve our natural resources, but promote the responsible usage of those resources. McClintock, again, was called away this week. We planned, Melinda asked him to be here over 6 months ago, and he readily agreed to be here. Recalled, the decision was made, final decision was made at the end of last week for Congress to continue in session this week, which was supposed to be a constituent outreach week. We had 3 town halls scheduled, plus another important events, but he won't miss a vote, and he's back in Congress, probably will be through the weekend and into next week. The congressman was a sponsor of H.R. 1526, which the Restoring Healthy Forests for Healthy Communities Act. Most specifically, he was a sponsor of an amendment which would facilitate expediting salvage on the RimFire. Not knowing what the fate of H.R. 1526 will be in the Senate, he's sponsoring a H.R. 1388, which is a RimFire Salvage Act for clearing away the obstacles to doing salvage in the footprint of the RimFire. Looking good for the proposed House Act, the House bill. It will go before the Natural Resources Committee next Thursday, and Mr. Hastings is behind it, Mr. Bishop are behind it, so it's looking good for getting through the House of Representatives Natural Resources Committee and through the full House. It's similar to what Senator Tom Daschle did some years ago for salvage in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Additionally, what I wanted to mention is also part of that bill is returning the resources that are derived from salvaging that timber that belongs to the people back into the restoration effort. That's what the bill calls for. Additionally, what the congressman will be pushing for is, as we work to restore the devastation of the RimFire, to make sure that local input via local government and organizations like TuCare are a major part of the restoration planning process and priority setting for the work that needs to go on to restore the environment that was destroyed by the RimFire. Finally, you can bet that, as Congressman Tom McClintock has done for the last 4.5 years, is advocate for the change in public policies and management practices that have led to the conditions on many of our national forests that lead to the catastrophic environmental devastation that occurred with the RimFire and others. So again, I didn't intend to speak for the congressman this morning. I just want to let you know where he will continue to emphasize in his position on the Natural Resources Committee and in Congress. And that said, I'm going to take a few questions, Mike.
Here's what we'll do on that.
Okay.
I think what we'll do on questions, yes, but they'll be in a few minutes.
Okay.
I think, Melinda, are we going to do the question and answer sheet? The green sheets that go around? Okay, so if you have questions for Rocky or some of the speakers, we'll give you time at the break to write those questions out, and then we'll ask them and then get you back up here. If anybody perceives I'm winging it a little bit, you're right. Okay, our next speaker, I want to see if Dr. Roger Bales, are you here yet? You are here, terrific. Did you get your program loaded into the, yes, everything is good, okay. then let me introduce our next speaker. And he has a very extensive bio, very impressive bio, and I'm going to read most of it here. And it's Dr. Roger Bales and Dr. Martha Conklin, both from UC Merced. They're going to join us in just a second. I could just say in their bio, neither of them commanded a U.S. aircraft carrier. But they've done some really great things. Dr. Bales joined the University of California, Merced as Professor of Engineering in June of 2003 as one of the UC Merced's inaugural faculty. Dr. Bales received his BS in Civil Engineering from Purdue University and MS in Civil Engineering from the University of California, Berkeley, and his PhD in Environmental Engineering Science from the California Institute of Technology. He worked as a consulting engineer from 1975 to 1980 prior to his PhD, and was professor of hydrology and water resources at the University of Arizona from 1984 to 2003. He has published over 130 papers in diverse fields of research, including snow hydrology, mountain hydrology, and biochemistry, polar snow and ice, containment hydrology, and water quality. So he's an expert in water, and we're looking forward to hearing from him. He's got a lot more on here. Very, very impressive bio. I'll say at UC Merced, Dr. Bales co-authored the Mountain Hydrology Research Group, which is deploying new research instrumentation at several Sierra Nevada sites, and has multiple ongoing collaborative research projects investigating mountain hydrology and its integration with ecology and biochemistry. Along with him is Dr. Martha Conklin, Professor of Engineering and a member of the Environmental Systems Graduate Group. She joined UC Merced in 2003 as part of the founding faculty. For most of her career, Dr. Conklin has focused on groundwater, surface water interactions, determining the time scales of reactions that occur at this interface, as well as groundwater contributions to stream flow using natural tracers. This stuff's so complicated I can't read it. Dr. Conklin is co-PI of the National Science Foundation Sierra Nevada Critical Zone Observatory located at the Kings River Experimental Watershed. She is a lead on both a science project to understand water and nutrient budgets in mountain meadows and the education and outreach efforts. And a lot more here in her bio, but I'm going to stop there. These are very, very well-educated, expert people, and let's give them a round of applause, and we'll see what they've got to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. I was asked to speak here before the fire, and I had prepared to talk about water. I'm still going to talk about water, but try to put it in the fire context. My apologies that Martha Conklin was delayed, but she should be here for the Q&A session afterward. So I'm sort of on my own here. I got three topics that I wanted to cover today, really in the context of the RimFire and in this region, is the current water issues, the critical link between water and forest management, especially going forward, and where are some of the knowledge gaps and opportunities there, and how forest management and watershed management fits into securing our water future. These conversations have evolved over the past few years with many water leaders in California, and I've made many trips up into the Sierra Nevada with people ranging from the leadership of Metropolitan Water District to Bay Delta to the other and Forest Service and other water agencies to carry on this conversation about the link between water and forests. Okay, current water issues. This photograph was given to me by a colleague from the Park Service. This is the Granite Creek Basin. Very much interest at this moment to Hetch Hetchy folks because one of their intakes is just below this severely burned area. For researchers like myself, it's also an opportunity to build a knowledge base around the impacts of fire and our response, because that knowledge base in many cases is rather thin on how to interject some additional science into the management of these areas. Now, agencies such as the Forest Service, Park Service, the land managers are doing immediate response right now. They're dealing with the immediate questions that I listed here, and this is really not what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about maybe the longer view of watershed management. But it's important to note that folks, the BEAR teams and others have already made assessments of how the post-fire storm runoff will differ from the way it was before the fire. They're focusing mainly on the response to a single rainfall event, I think, because of sediment, concerns about sediment discharge and so forth. I'm going to try to take a longer view and think about water yield and how that affects our water supply. Of course, they're looking at the potential for hill slope erosion using, well-established agency government procedures and that have been used in other fire areas. The potential for sediment not only from hill slopes but also from roads, and then how they can manage the stream channels to mitigate some of this erosion. Okay, so I view that as being pretty well under control and not an area where I, as a researcher or the university, can really have an impact. I want to turn to some of the things where we can. By the way, these pictures are downloaded from Forest Service INSEE websites, just illustrating that there are channels that are just ready for erosion when we get our big rain event, which I think some of you went on the tour yesterday saw, and the depth to which the fire went, and the hydrophobic nature of the soils, meaning that hydrophobic means water hating, means the water doesn't infiltrate the way it normally did before the fire, so you get more runoff from it, and thus potentially much higher downstream flows and that can carry sediment with them. These are some recurring questions that I keep getting asked around forests and water. Now this first one is a little newer. How will the post-fire water yield? And by water yield, I mean how much water supply for downstream users we're getting through stream flow and so forth, versus how much water is used by vegetation in the watershed. We have areas where there's dense forest and where there used to be dense forest, but now there's burned forest. How will these heterogeneous areas respond? And also burned areas where we also already have vegetation coming back after the fire. So when it's burned, the vegetation doesn't use water. There should in principle be more runoff, but vegetation comes back right away. And I'm sure people have been out to areas that have burned 10, 15 years ago that used to be mixed conifer forest are still shrubland, because the vegetation that comes back may be quite different from what was there before. Well, and then a very pressing question for the state that we work on with industry and water industry leaders especially are trying to plan for what will be the water yield with climate warming, because we have in the Sierra Nevada a snowpack dominated runoff. As the temperature warms, we have more rain, less snow. That trend is already occurring in most areas of the western United States, at least not at the highest elevations, but at the transition, the lower snowpack elevations. That means that snow runoff is earlier in the year, and it also, warmer temperatures increase the growing season, maybe meaning we may get less runoff. But attaching numbers to those is a challenge because we haven't been through that experiment before. So that's one of the longer term questions that we keep getting asked, and I think where the university is trying to partner with the resource management community. And then, another question that is coming up more and more, what was the historical water yield prior to fire suppression? We know that forests are managed for fire suppression. It's important to protect private property and so forth. And so fire suppression policy started or action started at least in the early part of the 20th century. And our forests, our current forests, high-density forests, are a result of that fire suppression policy, and those fire suppression policies and forest management have made an impact on the water cycle in the mountains, including the amount of water that's used by vegetation and the amount of water that runs off. But what are those numbers? And that's an area where our research teams are trying to help provide numbers and an ability to make predictions. When somebody asks me what's the historical runoff, I go to the background question, well, what was the historical forest like? So I need to know what the historical forest was like in the 1860s or 1900s if I'm going to estimate what was the runoff back then. I've put up a couple photos here. These happen to be much further north, East Branch of the Feather. I think, how many people have seen the Fire in the Sierra Nevada by George Gruel? It's a book of a lot of pictures, yeah. So that's anecdotal, but it's good. It's pretty good stuff. There's at least a dozen pairs of photos in there that I think like this, that show the current higher forest density and looking back at areas that apparently were not logged and not subject to fire just before the photo was taken. And then, question, could we take the forests back to that condition of lower densities? I'm not a forester, I'm a hydrologist, so those are the questions that I ask. Again, just another set of photos from South Fork, American River, against fairly striking distances. I don't know that one can get quantitative information from these photos. Again, Strawberry along Highway 50, seeing, I can't see these pictures too well from this vantage point. I hope some people can see them in the audience. From 1860 versus 1993, lower density both in the foreground and background versus higher density in the more recent photo. And the classical photo where it shows mix of oak and pine in the Yosemite Valley and denser pine stands and fir stands currently. Okay, so historical conditions post-fire, our forests are changing quite a bit. But fortunately, there are some quantitative data, and these are data from the Stanislaus National Forest, published in a paper by Collins and colleagues, Brandon Collins of the Pacific Southwest Research Station of the Forest Service and colleagues from UC Berkeley, where they evaluated field data from 1911 and then made their own remeasurements a few years ago of forest densities on a large number of plots in the Stanislaus National Forest. Basically, the bottom line is they found about twice as much biomass in trees, basically, in the forest in their resurveys versus in the 1911. And they looked through the records and looked on the ground and so forth to verify that the earlier surveys were not places that had just experienced fire. So they feel that these are probably the best estimates that can be made of the difference in forest density now versus previously. So 50%, historical was about 50% of the recent measurements of biomass. But when you look at the number of trees, I'm sorry, these numbers are trees per hectare, multiplied by 2.5 to get trees per acre. And so there's about 4 times, or only 25, current historical was only about 25% the number of trees that are out there when they did the resurvey. The forest is full of small trees making up this additional biomass, whereas they tell me, my silviculture colleagues tell me, that the historical forest was much of the biomass was in large mature trees, and it didn't have these small ladder fuels and many small stems out there, which they tell me are really the crux of the problem in trying to mitigate wildfire. So can we take the forest back to this historical, mature forest condition and make great reductions in the number of stems per acre and have lower biomass? Well, I would say that the Forest Service researchers and collaboration with managers are trying to work in this direction, and I refer to a General Technical Report 220, which articulates some of the steps needed to get there. Now, I bring this up because, fortunately, that also has benefits for water. It also has benefits for water. And so similar treatments in the forest to reduce the probability of a catastrophic wildfire also should increase the runoff by reducing the water used by vegetation. Okay, I want to turn a little bit to some water and forest management topics now. A couple years ago, some colleagues from UC Merced, UC Berkeley, and Environmental Defense did what I'll call a scoping report. It was basically a literature review to say, what do we know about the link between water and forests, and the link between specifically forest management and water in the Sierra Nevada, to provide a basis then for some building the knowledge base to inform decision makers about the water impacts of those, to answer some of the questions that I posed earlier. This was supported by the state and by the Sierra Nevada Conservancy and a private foundation. 3 issues: water use by vegetation, that is how much more or less water is used by vegetation depending on the forest densities. Interception losses. More canopy, more snow and rain you're going to intercept, which evaporates or sublimates back to the atmosphere and doesn't get to the ground. So how do we get snow to the ground? And then timing of snowmelt. Once we get the snow to the ground, can we keep the sun off of it long enough that it just stays there and provides part of our reservoir for water supply? Because think of the storage. I mean, in California, we have dams in the foothills, but we also have the snowpack storage, and we have the storage in the soil in the mountains. Together, that snowpack and soil storage provide about as much as the dams do for the Sierra Nevada. So the snowpack is a very important seasonal storage reservoir, and I would advocate that we need to pay attention to managing the snowpack, especially given that climate warming is threatening that storage. Okay, trees, again, trees can block the low-angle winter sun, retarding snowmelt. So we actually have put out dozens of these low-impact, low-cost snow measurements in the mountains, because when you say, well, how much snow is out there in the mountains, nobody can really answer that question accurately. We measure snow at a few index sites called snow pillows and snow courses, but we don't measure it across the landscape. So we know how much snow is at a few places, but we don't know how much is in the whole basin in the mountains. So we've put these out, and we measure snow in open areas, under the canopy, and so forth. And as you can imagine, snow is different when you're under the canopy, and any skiers have probably fallen into tree wells and things like that when you're out in the mountains. Trees also absorb solar radiation and then emit heat, which melts the snow. So all these bring up a multi-dimensional problem that which complicates our ability to make forecasts of the impact of vegetation management or thinning and fire on the snowpack and the runoff. And some of these tree wells can get pretty big. So I try to work based on data and measurements. And fortunately, there's a very excellent Forest Service maintained research site just up the road here near Dodge Ridge, near Pinecrest, called the Stanislaus NF Experimental Forest. And the Pacific Southwest Research Station of the Forest Service is doing research there, working with the forest. They've gone back to these historical plots, which have been in place for many decades, and done some experimental thinning of the forest. And maybe you can't see the labels here, but the dense areas are what they call control, no thinning. Then they did some where they did variable thinning. You open up some large areas, you leave clumps of trees for habitat and so forth. And others where they're more even thinning, they took out every other tree or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how they did it, because I came in after the thinning was done. But our role was to evaluate the effect of this thinning on the snowpack. And in a survey last year, we made about 1,200 measurements on March 7th, which was about the time of peak snowpack, such as it was last year. And we find that the variable thinning units and the thinned units have more snow than the controls, more snow getting to the ground. And the reason for this is because you have more open areas, Open areas have, this is under a closed canopy. When you go out in the open, you get about 50% more, about 50% more snow accumulating in these open areas versus under the canopy. And we've seen this at other areas where we've done similar measurements. So this is the sort of observational basis that we try to use to help extend these forecasts. This is just a photo of some of the thin units where you see the sort of densities that the researchers are aiming for in the foreground. They tell me that they removed about a third of the biomass here and about half of the stems in this thinning. And then in the background, you can see, I think, an unthinned area. This is what they call an even thinning. It still looks fairly dense to me, but again, I'm not a forester or a silviculturalist. And they call this variable thinning, where you can find some openings up to about 1/4 of an acre. And our job has really been to evaluate how the size of these openings affects the snowpack and the snowmelt. So this is, I think, this is the sort of thing that I'm really excited about, that is being able to partner with the Forest Service and land managers to build the knowledge base for understanding and the impact of thinning on the water cycle and the water yield that we'll be getting from the Sierra Nevada. So it's still a myth that we can predict the magnitude of the water cycle in the Sierra Nevada. You've run into people who do hydrologic modeling. I do hydrologic modeling, but the data going into that is pretty thin in most areas of the Sierra Nevada. That is, a lot of the modeling that we do is based on the assumptions that go into the model rather than observations on the ground. So our group really has, as researchers, has the luxury of doing research on the ground so that our results are based on data and observations. That means they only cover small areas, though, and you have to extrapolate to larger areas based on that small area knowledge. So again, the snowpack and the soil are our main storage reservoirs. We don't even measure or predict how much of those are storing, although I say our group and collaborators have put out several hundred soil moisture measurements in the mountains since we started doing work up to 10 years ago. We don't measure precipitation at most parts of the Sierra Nevada. We don't know how much precipitation occurs. Sure, there's precipitation maps, but they're based on extrapolations from lower elevations in many cases. Very few precipitation measurements of above about 8,000 feet in the Sierra Nevada. And I can say our estimates are that at least 1/3 of the snowpack is above that elevation. And other quantities similarly. We don't know how much evapotranspiration or water use by vegetation. Evapotranspiration a long word for water use by vegetation and evaporation. Most of that is water use by vegetation, where you have forests, with evaporation being a much smaller quantity. So that leads us to, I'm sure people have seen this map of the RimFire, with the red being the severely burned areas and the yellow less severely burned, and the green either low intensity or not burned at all. That means that our estimates of water impacts are going to have a very high uncertainty, because we really do have very few data from this area. Now we have the opportunity to maybe make those measurements after the fire and compare burned and unburned areas. And in working with colleagues in the, I've been talking with colleagues in the Park Service and Forest Service over the past few days about trying to get some measurements out there. Okay, I want to say a couple things about basic water balance. Precipitation would be it snow or rain. Again, we can measure. We measure at some places. Satellite, we use satellites to measure the snowpack, and satellite is really the only way we're going to measure the whole Sierra Nevada, or aircraft. So precipitation that comes in goes out of the mountains as either evapotranspiration or runoff. Basic water balance, I'm ignoring groundwater here, smaller component, but bear with me here. Mike, you mentioned I used to be at University of Arizona. We just had two terms to the water balance there. Precipitation equals evapotranspiration. We had very little runoff in Tucson, but fortunately we have runoff here. So we measure those, and our research collaborators at UC Merced and other campuses have research areas where these circles are indicated, including the Stanislaus NF experimental forest here, where we're making measurements of these quantities. Our main measurements of the evapotranspiration are here in the Sierra National Forest, in collaboration again with the Forest Service at some of their research sites, where we actually put towers that extend above the canopy, and we measure the water exchange and carbon exchange between the canopy and the atmosphere. It's the first measurements in the Sierra Nevada, and I wanted to share some of those with you because I think these are important results as we go forward on forest management. So there's a tower, and this one's actually about 150 feet tall. These are tall trees out there. So again, elevation, and this lower and on the vertical axis on the ordinate here is evapotranspiration, water use by vegetation, basically. So four locations, and each dot is a year's worth of measurements. So at this lower elevation, which is actually in the oak savanna at San Joaquin Experimental Range, we see less than, about 1.5 feet of water going back to the atmosphere. Most of the precipitation goes back to the atmosphere as evapotranspiration. Then we go up into two mixed conifer sites, and this is where we start to get a good bit of runoff, but these are pretty high evapotranspiration numbers, almost 3 feet of water on average here. And that's, so we're getting, of the water that's coming in, we're only getting, here 10 to 30% of the precipitation as runoff at these locations. And then we go to the higher, the red fir transition, and there it's cold in the winter, so the trees shut down more, and shorter growing season, we get a lot more runoff. Much of our runoff comes from these higher elevations that are snowpack. So the lower elevation is water limited, the higher elevation is cold limited. In between is this broad mixed conifer happy zone for trees because it's not too cold, it's not too dry, they grow. That's how where we get the very dense forests. I know it's not a technical term, but researchers tend to call it the happy zone because the trees are very healthy and can grow to high densities. So, and with climate warming, of course, we're expecting this happy zone to shift upward. We don't know what's going to happen at the lower transition because we haven't really, that's a future question we're looking at over the next few years. This is part of, Mike mentioned our critical zone observatory that Martha Conklin's involved with. We're expecting an announcement next week that'll be continued for another 5 years to help build the knowledge base on this. So getting to the crux question, the impact of thinning on evapotranspiration versus streamflow. So at these, I'm picking a mixed conifer site here. So we have good data for current conditions. This axis says percent biomass reduction. What's the impact of thinning on water yield? And then this is the quantity. The lower part, the lower red shaded bar is the runoff, the upper bar is the evapotranspiration, and the total is the total amount of precipitation. So again, the precipitation goes out, and the watershed is either runoff or evapotranspiration. And this is a 5-year average based on research. So we can nail what's happening currently. What's happening with thinning is still an extrapolation. So the slope of this line, or the percent gain in runoff with thinning, is what we want to predict, and we are predicting it, but our uncertainty is still about a factor of 2, at least, in these, because we have almost no data to start with on this. So we're very aggressively trying to find sites where there is thinning being done, where we can evaluate that to provide quantitative prediction tools of this change in runoff versus evapotranspiration. And I should also note that in order to achieve these gains, many past land management policies, you go and you thin the forest to reduce the fire risk, and then you move on, you come back in 30 years. If you're going to sustain the gains in water yield, you're going to have to do periodic controlling the understory, or it's going to grow back. So, which means in order to achieve water gains, it's going to cost probably more to manage the forests than has historically been done. And another reason we're trying to get these quantitative predictive tools is so that land managers can engage in conversation with other beneficiaries about who pays for it, who pays for the forest management. If you're going to be asking for sharing of costs, you're going to need to validate and verify what's happening quantitatively. So that's where we are with that. Okay, securing the future, a few comments there. Making a water secure world. In California, we are working to provide new infrastructure to store, transport, and treat water. And water security, or a reliable availability of an acceptable quality and quantity of water, is based across the world, is based largely on storage. Areas that have storage have higher water security than areas that don't have storage, especially semi-arid areas such as California. So we're trying to build stronger institutions. We're trying to evaluate and update our infrastructure for a changed population and additional demands, for a changed climate and different assumptions that our current infrastructure was built on. And the foundation for this, where we're trying to work as a university working with, is to build better information for decisions going forward. And managing water in the face of climate change means managing what researchers call ecosystem services, or ecosystems rather, which means forest management. Forests are, some people like to say forests are the largest users of water in California. Well, in terms of where precipitation goes after it comes into the state, certainly a better accounting system could benefit informed decision making. So if one is going to manage water in the face of change, whether it be climate change or changes in demand or changes in ecosystems, you're going to have to manage the ecosystem in order to manage the water. And that may mean that the beneficiaries of that water management help pay for the ecosystem management too. So there's no silver bullet, I don't think, to this. We have to find collaborative ways to work together through stronger institutions. Let me just say that in terms of better information, over the last 5 to 10 years, there's been a revolution in low cost and available measurement technology. to provide answers to questions like how much snow is out there at a reasonable cost and other questions. Low-cost sensors, for anywhere from $50 to $150, you can buy these soil moisture sensors that agriculture colleagues use in their fields. They can also be deployed in the mountains. Low-cost snow sensors. Wireless technology, we don't have to run wires around the forest. Just put a little radio about this big on your sensor, and you can get the signal out either to a cell phone or satellite quite easily. We do that. Aircraft, satellite data are mature and readily available. We're instrumenting the American River Basin, which up to now had 2 snow pillows in the North Fork, 1 in the Middle Fork, and 8 in the South Fork, where there's more hydropower enters. This was the basis of the day-to-day snow information. We're putting out strategically placed sensors, several dozen snow sensors, soil moisture, and other sensors, temperature sensors, to capture the snow across the landscape. And this is a research project, but it's being done in collaboration with the water agencies, the stakeholders in the basin, the decision makers, the people that manage the water for hydropower and water supply. And I can say more about that. We're not doing it here in the Tuolumne. We're doing it in the American because that's where the people felt the greatest need and asked us to come in and work with them on that. We're working on a $2 million National Science Foundation grant with additional local support for that. So it's a research project trying to transition to operational, but I think it's a good template for what could and should be done across the Sierra Nevada. I'll just say in terms of water information, I think California could benefit immensely because we're a multi-billion-dollar economy that's based on, in part, on how much water we have available. The nation of Australia invested $200 million in a better water information system. How much have we invested in California? And linking that with forest management. Okay, so quick summary of research here. High evapotranspiration across a wide swath of the mixed conifer forest, and potential for management for increased and more stable runoff. There's actually a lot of resiliency in this zone to moisture stress. I didn't mention it, but our research results show that across this whole mixed conifer zone where we're making measurements, trees are drawing their water from deep strata. That it's not just the top 3 or 4 feet where most of the roots are. That 3 or 4 feet is dry in the late summer, and the trees are still putting water back to the atmosphere. They're drawing water from the deeper strata. That says to me there is some reasonable resiliency there to moisture stress. Now, I don't know how far that goes, but I think it's important to build on. Higher water yield owing to shorter growing season makes this area climate vulnerable. Sustained forest management is going to require both investment and verification. And again, better information is critically needed to inform management there. So I did a back of the envelope calculation at the request of one of the water agencies about, based on the results we have thus far on the relationship between forest management and water, what would be the change in runoff with, in this case, a 40% reduction. I call it LAI, that's leaf area, but think of it as biomass. If one was to thin the forest and reduce the biomass by 40% over half of the area in the mixed conifer zone, our estimates are that in something the size of the Tuolumne Basin, you could gain about 100,000 acre-feet per year of water. Again, the uncertainty on this is high. It's a starting point for discussion, not a result that I'm publishing, but I think these are real numbers that bear further investigation. And if you extrapolate that across this area going from I can't quite read it, I think it's Feather down through Feather through San Joaquin, that would total about 700,000 acre-feet per year on average. So that's my message. I want to acknowledge several collaborators and folks that have funded our research, and I'm happy to engage in further dialogue about the RimFire hydrologic impacts or broader Sierra Nevada during the Q&A time. So thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to know we got that caliber of research going on here right in our backyard. And really great presentation, Dr. Bales. Thanks a lot. Dan Tomaszewski, you can make your way up here. We are going to change the question and answer format a little bit, just so you know. You do not have to write down your questions. We're going to open up the microphone here at the end of each speaker. Or actually, I think we're going to do it at the end of Dan's presentation. We'll open it up for questions to Dan or to Dr. Bales or to Rocky Deal, and then some more Q&A at the end. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dan Tomaszewski. He did not provide me a bio, and I think personally I'm grateful for that because I don't like to read these long bios, but I'll tell you this about Dan. He is the Vice President for Sierra Pacific Industries. He's in charge of their forest resources throughout the West Coast. It's a big job. Dan's been with them, how long, Dan? 36 years he's been with Sierra Pacific Industries. Dan graduated from UC Berkeley with a master's in forestry, and in spite of that, he's turned out really well. So without further ado, in that very lousy introduction, here is Dan Tomaszewski, who's a great, great forester.
Good morning. First of all, thanks for attending. Everybody's busy, has a lot to do. This thing is a huge impact on the community and, of course, the forest resources. And it affects all of us. It's not just us, and it's not just the Forest Service or other private landowners out there. It's really the public and a lot of public trust resources, water and wildlife, all kinds of things. I mean, it really is a disaster. On our end, out there, just some impacts from us first, and then what our plan is in terms of harvesting and rehabilitation. And then I'll make some few general comments on other issues. And then I do well, usually, in a question and answer format, and I'd rather do that than just talk at you. So pretty quickly here, the amount of land we lost out there or has some fire in it is about 16,000 acres. Mainly in the Deadwood, in the Granite Creek and Jawbone Creek drainages. The old West Side lumber lands, some of you remember, the managed standard lumber, fiberboard. Those are lands that we lost. Out of that 16,000 acres, about 9,000 is really toasted and burned pretty hard. And there's another 3,000 or 4,000 or so that's kind of a moderate burn. It's patchy, it's got some underburn, it's got some crowned out trees. We'll have to see how some of that works. And then there's another 3,000 to 4,000, and it's tough to get your hands around, of acres that are pretty light intensity burn. Now, having said that, we have to watch that carefully because our experience in burns is that while trees appear green now, immediately after a fire, a lot of them are stressed or the cambium's cooked and they're going to die. They're going to die next spring or next summer when they get stressed. So we tend to be fairly aggressive because we can't afford to come back or keep coming back. That's an experience that we've been through on a whole host of fires. So our view is that we're often pretty aggressive out there on trees that, in our view, have a low probability of making it, because once we're out of there, to come back for those few trees is really expensive and hard to do. So those are kind of the numbers. We had about 4,000 acres plus or minus of plantations that were old enough to have merchantable trees in them. And those were mainly planted, and Ken Fleming was involved in that, as was Dick Plant and others, from the old granite burn in the early 70s. Those trees are 14, 16 inches in diameter and have small logs in them. There's another 3,000 or 4,000 acres out there that are younger plantations, pre-merchantable, that really we're just going to push over and have to start over. Those investments are big. We think we're pretty efficient, but all in terms of planting and getting them released and the prep and all that, you're $500 to $600 an acre. So if we've got, pick a number, 7,000 acres of that, you're looking at $4.5 million just for that. And of course, you're not going to get a crop out of that for 40 years plus. So it's really, there is no state rule that requires a private landowner to reforest, but that's the business we're in, and we have to, we're going to make those investments even if none of us here will ever see a return to those, but that's just the way, good land managers act. We got to get that stuff going. There will be, it'll take us probably 3 years to get it all replanted on our ground. We have adequate seed, because it's a long process. You got to take the seed, you got to put it in the nursery, you got to grow the tree, and then you got to plant it. So we can't do it all in 1 year. It's going to take us 3 years. And so I think we have adequate seed that fits that zone for planting. That's important. You can't take seed from the North Sierras, put it down here, and expect the trees to do well. So that process is starting, and the staff is really busy. At the same time, the whole thing is a race against time. The deterioration is already setting in. You see out there, when we were out there, Tim and staff, Ken, we were out there 7-8 days after the fire burned through our area, and there were already pitch tubes in the small trees, which means bugs are trying to get in there, and that's what the pitch tube is. The tree's trying to keep it out. So that was pretty stunning to us. We usually don't see the bugs starting to work that fast, but we do in this instance. So it really is a race against time, particularly on the smaller timber. The bigger wood, even though it'll get the blue stain in the pine, which cuts the value in half pretty quickly, big wood will last a year, 2 years at the most, usually if you're lucky, depending on weather conditions. So we don't have a lot of time, and frankly, neither does the Forest Service. And so time is of the essence, not just to recover what's out there of value that's merchantable, but also to do some of the rehabilitation and restoration work, try to minimize the erosion. And on that front, it really is incumbent on us to get going quickly. We need to get straw put down or erosion control methods used where we need them, crossings repaired, road damage repaired. And we need to try to minimize the erosion. What happens with a fire like that, particularly a hot one, is you get a hygroscopic layer. It cooks the soil kind of like glass, so that the water, when it does come, precipitation doesn't soak in, and the soil's ability to absorb a lot of moisture and minimize runoff is really reduced. So what happens out there is you can have, in those hot burned areas with that kind of soil, you can have huge amounts of runoff and huge amounts of damage in terms of downstream erosion. And of course you have hetchy and you have water supplies as well as native fish and all those values that are affected. So we really got to get out there. We have to do the erosion control work as soon as we can. One of the things that we found, that we're in pre-publication on a study that our research person, Dr. Katie James, along with Dr. Lee McDonald from Colorado State, has done. On the Ponderosa fire, which is just east of Redding, last year, we hustled out there right after the fire, before the first rain, and we put in these sediment traps. And they're V-shaped wooden structures that are about this high. Each side of the triangle is maybe from here to the wall. And the point of the triangle faces downhill, and then there's two sides come up like this. And then the floor of it is fabric cloth, that black, tough stuff that you see people put under pavement. And what we're doing is, it's not high tech, we're just trying to capture the sediment. And what we did was a study where we put those traps in a number of different areas in similar swales, same topography, same soil type and all of that. And we're gonna measure how much sediment is generated when the rains come. And we were lucky to really hustle and get all of those put in, and I'm really oversimplifying, but we had some where we did no logging, no harvesting, no nothing, the control group. We just put the traps in these swales and left them. Then we had some where we did logging and biomass harvesting, and those were the ones in the middle. And then we did some where we did the logging, harvesting, but we contour tilled the slopes. Essentially like a tractor in a field, we contour tilled cross slope, not up and down, because you don't want the water, concentrating. And we tried to disconnect all the streamside zones from that tilling to keep the water and the erosion from overwhelming the stream. And what we found is where we did the control, we did nothing. The sediment produced when the rains came, and in this case up there, we had an inch of rain right off the bat, not a big impact. And then we got a storm that was one of the 3 or 4 biggest storms they've had in the last 45 years since records were kept in the Battle Creek drainage up there. And the sediment production per acre was 4 or 5 times what in the control stuff where we didn't harvest versus where we harvested and then tilled the soil and broke up that layer so the water could be absorbed by the soil. The sediment production was huge. Now this was a big storm. We got 9 inches in about 14, 15 hours. It was a big storm. But the tons per acre of sediment in the control, no harvest, were 15 to 25,000 pounds, or 15 to 25 tons per acre. Now, and those traps that were this high and that long were almost completely full. In the places where we logged, broke up the soil, and then did this contour ripping to catch the water and absorb it, those amounts of sediment were 3 to 5 tons per acre, 2.5. So orders of magnitude difference. And we're not out in publication yet. We're still writing and all that. But that really taught us a lesson, and that's what we're going to do out here, wherever we can, as fast as we can. We're going to disconnect the upslopes from the streamside zones so that we don't get that overland flow, and we're going to break up that layer to really increase the absorption. It's not cheap, and it's a race against time, because you got to get the area logged before you can come back and till it. So we're going as fast as we can, and poor old Tim, he's not getting a lot of sleep these days. Neither is the rest of the staff. But that's a really important erosion control measure, we think, that we're going to try to employ wherever we can. In terms of our harvest and the amount that's out there, we stopped all the green, of course, but we have a lot of green logs in deck at Sonora and at Chinese Camp because we didn't know this was going to happen. So we've stopped the green. All the contractors are now on the burn. Logs are coming. We've purchased other private burn out there already too. Those logs are starting to come. And we'll just see what the weather brings. Worst case, we would have an event like the one I mentioned up north, where we get a whole bunch of rain right off the bat. That'll really hurt. It'll hurt everybody. If we get snow and cold storms first and develop a snow layer, we'll be in a little better shape. But we can't control that. We just gotta, not throw rocks at each other and not moan and complain and whine. We just gotta get out there and do the work and get started. So that's our focus. We think we can handle all of the bigger logs. Sonora's a big log mill in our vernacular. But the small logs and the amount of small logs out there and the rate at which they're going to deteriorate, because the small logs deteriorate first. By next June or July, a lot of small logs are already going to be, pretty bad. So our choke point is really Chinese Camp and how much small logs they can handle. And it's not a regular small log sawmill like Anderson or Lincoln or Quincy is. It's a fence plant. That's what we had to do to survive down here and keep that mill going. We turned it into a fence plant. So it can't swallow quite as many small logs, as other mills can. But we'll end up, I think, putting some small logs underwater, storing them someplace else. Tim, I think, is going to rock road spurs out there so we can haul either early in the spring or even in the winter if we get some good weather in the winter we can haul. One of the issues we have is the roadside hazard trees that are along the roads we want to haul on, and how to coordinate with the Forest Service to get some of that stuff felled so we don't have an issue with safety and all of that. We're in discussions with them now. So that's kind of our plan. What we think will happen is that, we hope, is that we'll swallow most of our own wood in the next year or so by this time next year. And I'll make some comments about the Forest Service. They are constrained by their process. They absolutely are. And we have an emergency notice process. That's why we're out there started already. We have to comply with all the rules, the State Forest Practice Act, and all of that kind of thing. But under an emergency notice, you can get started. The Forest Service doesn't have that equivalent process. They have a categorical exclusion, but it only applies to a small area per incident, so that you can't use it on a huge area. So they've got to go through the process, and we all, including them, would like to see that process shortened for these kinds of natural disasters. But the truth is that we're not there yet, and that takes really congressional approval. On the House side, the willingness is there to do that. But, and I'll just be frank with you, we don't see that sort of chance or desire on the Senate side. And it has to happen on both sides to make it happen. So what I think is going to happen is roadside hazard will come first. We'll have on the Forest Service, and we'll be ready to try to swallow as much of that as we can. We can haul some of it north to places like Lincoln. Sierra Forest Products and Terabella can handle some. But the longer you haul it, the more trucks you need up, because it takes more trucks to haul less wood. And truck availability is a constraint down here. So that's going to be, we can deal with it, and that's why we want to, say, deck some logs up out there in the winter and then haul them in the wintertime when there are more trucks available to places like Lincoln. But on the Forest Service, I think, and this is my opinion alone, it's going to take a year before substantial salvage, other than the roadside hazard, is going to be available. We're going to be kind of cleaned out of our own wood by then, so we think we'll be ready to take a bunch of it. But when you look at what burned on the Forest Service, you know, pick a number, 100,000, but a good chunk of that isn't timbered, so you can't apply a volume per acre across the whole gross acres. And then what's steep, would have to have roads or helicopter. You've only got a year or 2 years at the outset. You don't have a lot of time. So to put a bunch of infrastructure in there, build a bunch of roads, I don't think it's going to happen. So we have to focus on what is available and what's going to be available. That process is going to take a year unless we can get some movement back there. And as much as they're fighting now about things, what are the chances of that? I'm just being blunt and not Pollyannish, I hope. So we're not going to spend a lot of time throwing rocks at each other or anybody. We're going to get our stuff done, and we're going to support them to get their stuff done. When they need your help in the public comment period, when they get through with the EA or EIS, the EA probably, you all need to help say you're for it. I mean, let's help them get something done. Because they, coming out of the woodwork will be those people that make a living trying to slow that process down. You know who they are. We've had 44 lawsuits on our own timber harvest plans in court. We've won all 44 so far, but they're still around and they'll be back with some more. And they're going to do that to the Forest Service. So you all need to, in my view, be willing to support, even if you're not happy with everything they're doing or did or what happened in the past. We got to at least salvage something out there. So I'm asking you to be a little bit supportive when the time comes of that. It's going to be frustrating for everybody, for us, for them, but I think we really need to focus on what can get done and be realistic about the time frames. So that's kind of our plan. My bigger picture view is that, we have kind of two options in terms of managing these large forest ecosystems, irrespective of ownership. One, we can do what we're doing now, which is wait for the next, big disaster to happen. We can throw a bunch of money at it. The one thing the Senate side is willing to do seems like throw some money at it. It won't fix the process, just throw some more money at it. We can have DC-10 bomber drops, which cost about $60,000 a drop, is what I've heard. And we can have big infrastructure to fight fires. There's a lot of vested interest who actually have kind of an interest in having fires that go for a long time. Lots of overtime, that's how you put your kids through college. Lots of contractors from in-state and out-of-state who make money on these big campaign fires. It's nothing overt, there's nothing corrupt about that, it's just the way it works. So there is a lot of infrastructure that doesn't really mind having a big old fire that lasts 6 weeks. So we can continue to do that and spend tons of money and have the Forest Service raid their other accounts every year for firefighting to the tune of $400 or $600 million nationally to take it out of their other accounts of the work. Or we could fund a lot less money doing fuels work ahead of time out there and reduce the fuels and do what Steve's going to talk about that we've been working on in terms of an all lands approach and keep these things from spreading and give us a chance to get out there when we do have a fire and get them corralled in a much smaller space than having what happened out there happen again and again and again. Right now, fires drive our whole operations. We had 2 great big fires up north last year. Our whole plan of green and, sustainable harvest and all that and going here and there just gets subverted every year by these fires. And we're adaptable and we're quick, and we have people like Tim and Ken and Matt and Brian there that are capable of dealing with this. But it's no way to run a business, and it's certainly no way to run a forest, and it's no way to run public policy with regard to our national forests. So I'll shut up and let you ask questions if you want.
Okay, folks, what we're going to do is we're going to take some time to ask Dan a question if you have one, or to Dr. Bales, I think Dr. Conklin's here, or to Rocky Deal. So I'm going to get things started with a question for Dan. If you have a question, come on up. Forget writing the question down. Just come on up and ask it. And Dan, I'll start with, I've heard kind of looking forward down here. And this may be a tough one to speculate on, but I'll ask you to do your best speculation. Because, okay, we look forward 2 years, the salvage done, 2-3 years. You guys have lost some land base and probably had to adjust your timber planning. Forest Service is going to probably adjust their timber planning a lot. I don't know, but what do you think going ahead to keep our bills going? Are you guys worried about the out years?
If we had, you know, another one of these this year, or next year another one, 2 or 3 more in a short time frame, maybe. But we have enough land and enough access to raw material and enough stuff farther north, and we always joke it's like holding mercury. You squeeze it and it squeezes out somewhere else. You can't get it. But we have a big enough land base and enough inventory that I don't think that that's a real concern over the medium term. Like I said, if we get one after another, then we're going to have to look at it. There would be some effect on our harvest level, but I don't think it's very big right now, you know, based on our past experience with those fires up there. We have 1.6 million acres in California, and then of course there's other private, you know, as well as the Forest Service. And so right now, I don't think that the community should be worried about that. There's been some, I'll just quickly mention, there's been some questions, why can't you build another mill, or somebody should build another mill? Well, you know, these days you have to have a world-class mill to compete, because we don't compete with just the, you know, like Sierra Forest products. We compete with West Fraser out of interior British Columbia, you know, with great big efficient mills where the government is a true partner and supporter of what they do, you know, a little different than California's climate. So those people are tough, and they're low cost, and they produce a good product. And that's who we compete with in this big commodity market in the U.S. and overseas. So if you're going to build a mill that'll really compete, one, with the permitting, it'll take you at least 3 years. Well, if you're pointing at the RimFire, it's done by then. Two, the people like CBD will come out of the woodwork and appeal your permitting for your air permit and all of that kind of stuff. So, and then once you got the mill built, where's the wood going to come from? Because the fire's over, unless you got another fire. So this idea that you could, you know, suddenly build one, one, I don't think personally is going to happen, and two, it's just not feasible from a business standpoint.
What do you think the ratio of the cost to get this fire under control would be as to managing the forest properly? Would it be more efficient to forest farm and forest farming and then forest thinning, or have another fire come in and then have all this rigmarole?
Well, I think and it won't be cheap, you know, but for $3, $4, $5, $6 million per forest, which is dwarfed by the amount of money that gets spent on an incident like the RIM, you could do a lot of fuels work every year, and you could develop a system of fuel breaks and strategic areas of vegetation management, not just around the urban interface, which is needed, the WUIs that people talk about, but out there in the woods, on the ridges and along main roads and all of that, where you'd have a chance to get these things slowed down, get them to come out of the crowns, and get crews out there that at least they could defend and backfire from. I think it's, you know, 10 times or more less every year than having these big fires and having to pay for them.
Yes, I'm interested in where you did the contour tilling, where the soil was very damaged. Did you simply till to break the soil, or did you plant any kind of a grass, native grass cover to try to hold the water?
No, what we have some concerns about, you know, one, the native grass, it doesn't last very long often, you know, and what we did was, it's essentially a D7 or D8 with 2 teeth on the back that just rips contour furrows, tills them up. And it goes maybe this deep or so. And then we came right behind and planted trees. I mean, we've got half of that burn already planted. It burned, this time last year. So we didn't do any native grass, but we did straw on all of the fill slopes into the stream zones and all the crossings and all of that. There have been issues in the past with, if you plant a real thick grass cover, and it works, and sometimes it doesn't work, then you've got competition for the trees you want to plant there, because grasses are very efficient at taking up moisture, particularly when the trees are little guys without a big root system. So we haven't done a lot of planting native grasses just out in the general forest landscape.
As much as you strictly private property, are you going to have any of these so-called do-gooders on your property? And are you going to be able to get rid of them without any problem?
Everybody has an opinion, and everybody's entitled to an opinion in this country about forest and resource management. We joke, there's a pretty famous phrase by a humorist named P.J. O'Rourke that there are some members in the environmental community that'll do anything to save the environment except take a science class. And we experience those kind of people. On the other hand, everybody's entitled to their opinion. We try to be accommodating, but we're pretty tough-nosed when it comes to defending our interests. Yeah, and we have a lot of science. The Emerson family's invested in a ton of research that a lot of others haven't done, like this tilling. That thing was not an inexpensive deal. So when it comes to defending our interest and good values in terms of forest management, we're pretty tough, and we got thick skin, and I've been around for a long time, and I go home and I have a few drinks and I don't lose any sleep over that.
We can't stand before the meetings. I have one question. Mike Scanfield, forester, about 50 years. I was with the Forest Service initially, then private consultant, and then into endangered species, and then erosion control. So a lot of the things you said, so wise, and I really appreciate it. This is a little separate from that, and I want to also address the representative, the congressman, in the firefighting end. Back some 30 years ago, we used to use the military a lot, and I know there was some use of the military this time, but have you, or has the congressman looked into the possibility of making that a major objective for the military, to set up large organizations to deal with massive firefighting efforts? Because they would come in, they'd set up the whole fire camp, as you remember, they'd set up everything for us, and if that could be men that were set up with staff, everybody could handle campaign fires, seems like an excellent use of the military. Have you heard or seen any of that movement?
I've heard proposals, partly from, some from retired Forest Service people, some from within Congress. We haven't pushed any on our own, but to separate the firefighting function from the Forest Service's function and have it be kind of a quasi-military outfit with quick response and all of the macho stuff that comes with being in the Marines or whatever it is. I don't know that we know enough to form an opinion. You still could have a bureaucracy. What I do know, though, is that the quick response is essential. And what happens is that with the incident command team concept, which applies to all emergencies, not just forest fires, and it makes sense, at a certain point, local resources are overwhelmed and you need help. But that lag time, we always think that if, on the Forest Service particularly, if they don't catch it the first night, and we think nighttime is a good time to fight fire despite continued safety concerns and all of that, that then the incident command team's coming, and that's going to be a lag before they get set up and get the camp set up and get all of that assignments. In the meantime, the fire's going. So I can see an advantage to a military, to a quick response type thing that was quick but sustained. But I don't know that would be all that much different from the current IC team structure. That's such a big proposition, and so political that, we got our nose to the grindstone getting the damn trees planted out there, so we haven't spent a lot of time on it yet. But I've heard those conversations. I don't want to monopolize everything here or slow us down, but if you... You are. Well, you know, I'm probably not the right person to answer that. I mean, Barney's up in a while, he can talk about how to fund it, but my understanding, what happens, there is a firefighting budget, of course, for the agencies, BLM and the Forest Service. But then, because these things are so expensive and they blow up, they temporarily raid other accounts of the Forest Service, like soils or veg mapping or whatever else that, you know, recreation. And then they usually get reimbursed by the Congress for those monies. Now, that's very simplistic, and Barney's probably going to shake his head, that's not true, but that's my general impression of how that works. But you're the payer. That's what I'm talking about in terms of spending a little money now or spending a lot of money chasing these things later. You know, it's our tax dollars. It's not magic. It's debt and deficit and all the things you're reading about. Thanks. Mike, there's one more, but I don't...
Oh, is there one more? We'll take one more.
All right.
Yeah.
Have they come across what was the cause of the fire at all, the RimFire?
You know, I don't know that, if they have. Sometimes those investigations take quite a while to get done in a formal determination. Sometimes they determine that they can't determine the cause, but to my knowledge, I don't know that we have a cause. I saw something in the paper about a hunter, but I'm not sure that was, you know, true or not. So maybe the Forest Service or somebody that with a little better knowledge could comment on that. I'm just not up on the cause, or that they've got it determined for sure yet.
Illegal campfire.
Okay. Illegal campfire, Barney says. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much, Dan. Every time I hear Dan speak, I just get more impressed with Berkeley's program, so it's really, good things do come out of UC Berkeley for sure. And Dan's one of them. Thank you very much. That was very informative. Okay, our next speaker will be equally informative, and I know you gave me a bio here somewhere, but you know what? I don't need a bio, and probably most of you don't either. Steve Brink is going to join us next. Steve is currently the Vice President of Public Affairs for the California Forestry Association, which is a group that represents our whole state with forestry issues, and Steve is excellent at it. He had a long, great career prior to that with the U.S. Forest Service, and ended up as the Deputy Regional Forester, I think, up in the Alaska region. What region's that? 10, Region 10. Steve's got a great background in forest engineering, and we're really pleased. He's often speaking here at the TuCare functions. Great to have him back again. Please welcome Steve Brink.
PowerPoint? Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for having me again this year. I always thoroughly enjoy speaking at TuCare. Most of you know that I have a passion for the land. There's nothing more important to me as a person than caring for the land. I learned that when I was 18 years old, when I started with the Forest Service. So I'm going to just briefly make a few remarks as an extension to what Dan Tomaszewski had to say. And I'm going to focus on the private landowner in the state and what they experience and have to deal with every day in an ecology that's fire adapted. As you all know, the Sierra Nevada is a fire adapted ecology. It does burn. Every tree species on California's forests are fire adapted, including redwood. We learned that again back in 2008 with the dry lightning anomaly in Northern California, where we burned thousands of acres of redwood. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to ask you, think in terms of the private landowner. Put their shoes on for a few minutes. I'm just going to talk about 4 things briefly. So let's go, I have the counter here. That'll turn it on. There we go. Uh-oh. What did I do wrong? The green button? Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Here we go. So 4 quick things. Again, from the private forest landowner's perspective. And for context, I'm going to use those landowners that are adjacent to national forests, although it could be other private landowners as well. It's the same, some of the same issues for the private landowner. And again, 4 quick things. Number 1, I'm going to talk just briefly about young stands and the relationship with wildfire on private lands and what these private landowners have to deal with. Then I'll talk just briefly about our overly dense national forests and the risk to the private landowner associated with that. And I'm not picking on the national forests, it's just they have really good numbers and good inventory, and I know the numbers. So it's easy. Plus, they have 50% of the productive forest land in the state. And then I want to talk specifically about the RimFire, but it's almost true in every case, every wildfire in the state, the importance of keeping the road system open. You can't do the rehab, you can't do the restoration. The private landowner can't get his fire-killed trees out of the woods and do the site prep and planting if the road system is closed. I'll talk about that briefly. And then last, on a positive note, in my opinion, we now have all the major stakeholders in agreement that we need an all ownership's network of shaded fuel breaks on the landscape. And I'll close with that. So, private land, young stand, just barely commercial. And what we're learning is, and what we've known for a long time, if you have to plant an area, you might plant it on a 13-foot by 13-foot spacing. That's around 250 trees per acre. That's not ultimately how many trees you want out there. It's way too many. It's way too many because there's other competing vegetation that you got to shade out in large part. And so that's one of the reasons you have to plant more trees. Keep the ground shaded so that the brush doesn't take over. But there's a risk associated with that. Very vulnerable to wildfire. And that keeps, maybe not Dan Tomaszewski, but a lot of private landowners awake at night, wondering, am I going to survive this? When do I go in and thin it? Can I wait another 5 years and take the risk of whether I'm going to have a wildfire or not? So one of the things that's going on, and Sierra Pacific is one of the ones doing this, they're recognizing it's too much risk to leave this alone. And so they're experimenting, they're going back in, reopening up the old roads that were used for the previous entry, taking the trees and brush out of those. So then those roads are open and available for quick access should a fire get started. But also, it helps break up the fuels. So they're breaking up the fuels in those younger stands as well. So that's one of the headaches the private landowner faces. Another one, of course, is the national forest. And most of you have heard me before, their own numbers. On average in California, we have 266 trees per acre in the national forests, and the productive forest lands that are available for active management. And generally, the landscape can only support 40 to 100 trees per acre. So it's, on average, grossly overly dense, and we all know that. That's the current condition. And then unfortunately, as Dan mentioned, the Forest Service's processes and procedures they go through cause not being able to do near as much in fuels reduction and mechanical thinning as they wish they could do. The regional forester has a leadership intent paper that was written 3 years ago. It says we need 4 or 5-fold more of the kind of work on the right being undone on the national forests, and they just can't get there for lots of reasons. But the bottom line is, over the last 20 years, they're only removing 7% of annual growth. Well, the annual growth is 4.5 billion board feet per year. If you don't like to use the term billion board feet, that's 20 million tons a year. Just in the last 20 years, net, we've put 40 tons of new vegetation on every acre of productive forest land on the national forest. 40 tons. And unfortunately, as you all know, the number, the size, and the intensity of the wildfires is increasing, particularly the intensity. And it should be no surprise, the forests are getting denser as I speak. They're growing as I speak. So then, on top of that, we know where the wildfire risk is. It's in the west, and particularly in the Intermountain West and in California. And part of the reason for California is, and again, no surprise to anybody here, our fire season is at least 2 months longer than it used to be just a few decades ago. And Dr. Bales alluded to some of the reason why. I'm a simplistic person, I'm linear. Big part of the reason is we have 1/3 less snowpack than we had just a few decades ago. It's warmer in the wintertime. We get more of the precipitation in the form of rain than snow. And the result is less spring snowpack, which means less recharge to the soil into June and July, so we get a longer, drier fire season. It came home to me just a week or so ago down on the Sierra National Forest, where the fuel manager said, you know, if you think about brush out there, take manzanita, and it's healthy. It's in a healthy condition, springtime. The amount of fuel moisture in that brush, let's call it 100%. It's a healthy plant. When that fuel moisture during the summer drops to 80%, that manzanita reacts in a fire as if it were dead. When it's at 80% normal moisture, now you can grab the tip of a piece of brush and it'll break off in your fingers. That's about 80% of normal moisture. Take a guess what the normal moisture is in the brush today in the Sierra Nevadas. Any guess? 50%. Is it any wonder that we're having these explosive fires? Okay, then Dan mentioned briefly roads, and I just mentioned earlier the third piece of the puzzle for the private landowner that keeps them awake at night, and their fist clenched. They're trying to restore their property after a fire. The roads have to be kept open. Yeah, you might get snowed out for a period of the winter, but otherwise, the roads have to be open. For the RimFire and most fires, hazard tree removal is of absolute utmost importance. I was on the TuCare field tour yesterday. There are dead trees falling in the roads as I speak. They're already falling down into the roads, just a couple weeks after the fire. By springtime, there will literally be thousands of trees in the roads within the burn perimeter that will close the roads. That's just the bottom line. I don't know how the Forest Service could possibly keep up with the dead tree fall that's going to occur over the next 6 months. Fortunately, you got San Francisco Water and Power that takes care of part of the road system, and there'll be others to help. But this is the number one, in my opinion, issue for the, in this case, Sierra Pacific. Hazard tree removal. Then there's this little problem. This is tough to see, but this fire, when it consumed vegetation on the cut slopes and fill slopes of the road, and consumed that vegetation, and burned up the roots and the organics in that soil. That soil is loose. You could pick it up with your hands. It's already dry raveling, and has been for several, well, at least 2 weeks. You're already getting dry ravel. That material is moving already. And what this slide tries to show, and I'll try to point at it here, as I can. At the top of the photo, that vertical layer, the top 3 inches is asphalt, the next 8 inches or so is aggregate crushed base of a road. The fill slope is eroded away from the pavement structure. Traffic is going to bust that pavement off, and it's just going to keep crumbling and crumbling and crumbling because there's no shoulder to support it anymore. The fill slope is gone. The cut slope side of the road is the same situation. You're getting dry ravel off the cut slopes that's already filled tens of miles of ditch, roadside ditch line. In 2 weeks, filled up the ditch. You got rocks like this that have come off those cut banks already. Is the Forest Service going to be able to clean 500 miles of ditch every 2 weeks this fall and through the good part of the winter next spring? No way. This is a serious, serious problem. And then third, and I saw it yesterday, this dry ravel, we have dirt moving down the hillsides already. And it made it to the stream beds in a lot of places already. And you had 0.6 of an inch of rain last Saturday. And I looked out the window of the bus yesterday and I noticed in one intermittent channel, it was starting to run some water as a result of the rain. And there was a gully 5 or 6 inches deep. What in the world is that about? And I got to thinking, that's dry ravel that has come off of the slopes that go into the bottom of the stream course that's already put 5 or 6 inches of material in that stream bed. And it's already cutting through that and carrying it down the channel. Not counting the debris that's already in those channels. The Forest Service's own modeling of runoff, according to a recent Chronicle article, says you expect there might be 4 to 4.5 times normal runoff from any given level of precipitation. Well, 4.5 times more runoff of mud, not water, it's going to be mud, and debris. Every existing culvert in the Forest Service road system out there is undersized. It can't take it. There's going to be culverts plug up all over the place. And how in the world the Forest Service is going to be able to patrol and have a mosquito fleet of backhoes sufficient to try to keep those culverts open is going to be a nightmare. When those pipes plug and pond, and you get a big enough pond until it overtops the road, and then thousands of yards of fill go down the stream, and the road is closed for a long, long time. That, unfortunately, is what the Forest Service faces here for the next 6 months or so, and what will keep Sierra Pacific with their fists clenched. Just, can we just keep the roads open? Let's see, I covered all that. That leads to the positive message, we think. And that is an all lands network, all ownerships of ridgetop shaded fuel breaks. We've been in discussion about this for 1.5 years, and it culminated July 23rd of this year, where we now have CAL FIRE, the Fire Safe Councils, the utilities, San Francisco Water and Power, the Forest Service, and the large private industrial landowners, all on the same page now. We need to put a network of shaded fuel breaks on the landscape. Barney may mention this, they've agreed to do a pilot in the McCollum River drainage will be the first spot to start. This is a picture of what a shaded fuel break might look like. This one's way too narrow. They're going to have to be site specifically designed for the individual ridge top. For a broad flat ridge like this, they may have to be 1/4 of a mile wide or more to be effective. And the way a fuel break like this works is you make the canopy in the fuel break sparse enough that there's not enough fuel for a stand replacing fire to have enough fuel to keep going as a stand replacing fire. The wildfire drops out of the canopy when it hits that fuel break to the ground. And you make the fuel break wide enough so that a suppression crew feels safe to enter that fuel break and direct attack the ground fire. That's the way this works. Not always going to be successful, but in a lot of cases you will be successful. And it's a strategy. It's not to eliminate wildfires. We're going to have wildfires. This is a fire-adapted ecology. But the size and intensity of those wildfires, we think, can be dramatically reduced if we have 5% or so of the landscape in shaded fuel breaks on strategic ridge tops. And the good news is, all of these entities that are interested in this already know where those fuel breaks need to be. I could talk to the Stanislaus Fire Management Officer right now, and he could rattle off to me what ridge tops these need to be on in a heartbeat. And I'm not the one to ask, but I suspect there are a few IC team leaders around that would relish the opportunity to be running a fire with a network of fuel breaks on the landscape that look like this. He or she would have a fighting chance to get on top of that fire. Let me just say in closing here, and I said this on the tour yesterday, here in the foothills of the Sierras, which is where our rural communities are in large part in the Great Pine, Manzanita, Live Oak, and vegetative type. If any of you have driven the Big Hill Road from Columbia up to Sugar Pine, it's a wonderful vantage point if you can see through the brush of the condition of that vegetative type, just north of town here. That is a vegetative type that should be burned every 5 years or so. It hasn't burned for 50 years or more. And that's just a powder keg waiting to explode. So unfortunately, we have a serious problem in our foothills, not just upslope on the forest. So with that, I'll close, Mike, and we'll go on from there.
Any questions for Steve? Come on up now.
Uh-oh. This is going to be a tough one. I can feel it.
Hey, that last slide that you had that showed the shaded fuel, right?
Yes.
What would you estimate the canopy closure
Well, that's good.
was on that? Can you
Thank you.
explain what we're talking about with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. What should the density of the canopy cover be on a shaded fuel break? You know, the good news is, it was just a year ago, July, a premier research ecologist for the Pacific Research Experiment Station, Malcolm North, studied the historic nature of the vegetation in the Sierras and published a paper. And his paper says, on average, the ridge tops on the Sierra Nevadas had 18% canopy cover. That particular fuel break is probably more like 25 or so. So I don't know if we need to go down to 18, but certainly the research is there to go down to 18 if we wanted to. It will have something to do with the adjacent stands. If the adjacent stands are really dense and you have a big wildfire, you probably want a relatively sparse canopy or a very wide shaded fuel break. They'd each have to be site-specifically designed. You notice this one is was recent, so it's a bare dirt understory. You don't need to have a bare dirt understory, in my opinion. You could have lots of grasses and shrubs on the forest floor. In fact, it could be a perfect grazing opportunity. And that would still be then a perfectly functional fuel break. Did that do it? Okay, thanks. Uh-oh, here comes another one. This is another hard one, I can feel it.
Thank you, Steve, for your time with us. We appreciate your expertise. One of the questions that came to my mind in listening to you is how many ridgetop shaded areas exist in our region?
How many exist?
Or should exist?
Should exist.
And how much does it cost to get a quarter-mile swath through that?
Okay.
And how much total, so that maybe we could put a group of people to go to Chevron, as an example, and say, you know, the fuel cost alone, or the publicity, is worth X. Then we could be underwritten by international corporations to preserve our forests. Is that a viable idea?
Well, that's certainly one viable idea. As I said, I think it's roughly 5% of the landscape is what would be in fuel breaks, shaded fuel breaks. It'll vary by national forest, just because of the geography. Most of these national forests, you all know, the drainages run east-west. So the ridgetops run, guess what, east-west. And where are our state highways? They're on the ridgetops, between those major drainages, running east-west. Highway 108, which you've done a lot of work on. Highway 4, Highway 88, Highway 50. Caltrans is a big player here. As far as funding is concerned, personally, I believe these shaded fuel breaks will more than pay for themselves because of the economic value of the trees that need to be removed. The value of the sawlog-sized trees that will be removed will more than cover the cost of taking out the small trees and brush. So it's a net revenue producing operation. The other good news is, personally, I think it's environmentally friendly. And the reason is, you're on the ridgetops. Generally on the ridgetops, that's not where the spotted owls are. They're not in a sparse canopy. That's not where the goshawks are. That's not where the riparian areas are. And so it's relatively environmentally friendly. And so the NEPA document should be relatively easy to prepare. And the other thing, I think the biggest benefit is, as you do more and more and more, the connected actions and the cumulative effects of doing more and more and more, there aren't any. Because there's very little in terms of environmental effect of having these shaded fuel, in my opinion, on the ridgetops. Oh boy, all right.
I think to that question about funding, and Dr. Bale's research, which I thoroughly enjoy from a water management standpoint. A lot of the downstream users, when we're dealing with DWR and a lot of the water providers, and looking at Hetch Hetchy as a result of what's happening in the forest, I think the integration with those systems and their support of forest management upstream is exactly what Dr. Bale's research is leading to. And I know over on the Calaveras side, East Bay Mud is putting a lot of money in their forest and their systems, so when fires come, when sedimentation occurs, that those practices are not going to be realized on their downstream systems. And I think that's the awareness that needs to be brought even more fully forward on this issue. And again, Dr. Bales, wherever you are, thank you so much for your research. Truly, because as we go forward on this Delta issue, on watering the state, no matter what, we're looking to you and what you're doing. So again, thank you.
thanks for the comment. Those discussions are ongoing, and Dr. Bales, he's just a great guy, isn't he? He, in my opinion, is probably, we're fortunate, he's probably the national expert in evapotranspiration and in the research he does. We're very fortunate to have him. Yes?
What percent of private lands were devastated by the fire of the private, not Forest Service, but you use the Forest Service too? But land, I know Yosemite, there was a lot of Yosemite, but on private lands, how much was devastated?
Oh, well, you heard from Mr. Tomaszewski that, you know, they're in the neighborhood of 9,000 to 12,000 acres of their property that was severely burned. And then there are other small private land in holdings, which I think is what you're talking about. And I only know of one of them, but we're working on getting that list of names. One of them was completely wiped out. We also know there was significant damage to the cattle allotment areas, fences and so forth. And fortunately, NRCS has what they call the EQIP program, and the applications to recover, that's EQIP, to recover their private property infrastructure. Those applications are due like the middle of October, so it's really quick. And we're alerting through, you know, thanks to Randy Hanfeld and Sherry Brennan, there's an ad hoc group that's front and center on those kinds of things. Thanks again.
Okay, our next speaker is Mr. Bill Snyder with CAL FIRE. You can come up, Bill. I'll see if I can. There we go. Here he is. Bill is the Deputy Director for Resource Management with the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. He's been with TuCare several times before as a guest speaker. We're glad to have him back. Bill was appointed as the Deputy Director for Resources and Management in May of 2003. And I'm going to skip right to the bottom and tell you he's about to retire. He'll probably tell you that in a minute. He's got a big smile on his face. Bill's done a tremendous amount of things here, and I want to highlight though that he graduated in 1973 and he went to work for Pickering Lumber Company in Tuolumne County, where he worked for the next 23 years right here in our backyard in applied forest management on a 70,000 acre tract of timberland. That's part of what burned here in the fire. From 1996 through 1998, he was a chief forester and regeneration forester for Georgia Pacific's Martell and Fort Bragg districts. From 1995 through 1998, he served on the California State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection, and in 1998, he left the board to return to the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection as a forester in the El Dorado Amador unit. He's a registered professional forester. He's got some other things on here that are absolutely outstanding, but let's hear from Bill, and thank you, Bill, for being here.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here. I think one of the first things that comes to my mind when Melinda extends an invitation is there's another opportunity to visit the grandkids. They're getting a little older this morning. I did have to suffer through a kung flu session with my 5-year-old where I was the punching bag. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to stand up to that when he's about 7 or 8, but we'll see. And I think before I get started, I'd really like to call out Dick Plan, and I really do want to acknowledge his role in mentoring me early on. And I think as I look at coming to the end of my career, I really come to appreciate working for Dick, understanding the can-do attitude that he brought to everything he did, because I think it really has influenced my outlook on and approach to things. So in that context, I think I'm going to wax a little philosophical today in terms of looking at approaches to restoration, because I think the bottom line, when I came to work in 1973 and the Granite Fire occurred, we really did know what to do. And we did know how to get trees to grow. We did know how to salvage those trees from the burned areas. And we did it. And when I went out last week and looked at those 40-year-old plantations, you know, it just reconfirms that this stuff does work. And it's really not that complex when you think about what the steps are. So I think as we look at a lot of this stuff and some of the things I talk about later on, what has happened is we've really gravitated away from keep it simple, stupid, to make it complex as you can so you can't possibly get anything done. So, Melinda did ask me to talk a little bit about what is different between the regulations that apply to private operators and salvage and the federal. I'm really not going to talk to the federal because Barney Gant will do an eloquent job of that. But I think I'd also like to acknowledge that there's a certain amount of wisdom that went into crafting at least one part of the Forest Practice Act. And that was a provision in there to allow a landowner to begin emergency operations for salvage within a short period of time. And there are a lot of inelegant things that come out of legislation, but over the years, I think that really has been a true first step in getting restoration done. And I think as we get into some of my thoughts here, it's not broken and we don't need to fix it. And I do think we need to pay attention to people who do want to fix it to make it more complex and difficult to initiate operations. The other thing I think that we have as a department a responsibility to do is to provide assistance and facilitate in any way we can smaller landowners in getting their land restored. The department has a number of programs, including forestry assistant specialists who will be working with the National Resource Conservation Service and other agencies to provide landowners whatever assistance they need. This year, we did initiate and use some grant funding we had to get some seedlings and seedlings going for next year in anticipation that people are going to need to have that capacity. But I do think a lot of these smaller landowners have suffered a tragic loss. And really, from our perspective, it is our job to see what we can do to help restore those lands, if at all possible. So that's my brief spiel on looking at restoration. I think, from my perspective, the department's attitude needs to be one of helping to facilitate in any way we can the restoration of these private timberlands. And the next 3 months, I'll do what I can to do that, and I'm sure we'll continue that once I retire. But looking further, I think we've had a couple of slides. I think, there we go. See that my old gray image is now gone and replaced by blackened tree image, which probably a lot of you who were on the field trip yesterday had the chance to see just what fires do to the natural landscapes. But I think as we look at the 6 million acres that Steve talked about, it's a huge task. And I think there's a few tenets here I'd like to just bring to the table. They're not technical, but I'd summarize them as this. There's 5 of them. One of these is not broke. Don't try and fix it. The second one is you really can't make this stuff up, because I'll have some stories there I'll share with you that I just from time to time shake. It probably is what has made me white-haired over the years. The other thing is just do it, to borrow a phrase from Nike. We really do need to focus on getting done what we can get done. And the other part of this is it's not going to get fixed unless somebody's willing to lift the hood to see what's wrong. So let's start off with the first one. If it's not broke, don't fix it. And I think part of what that gets to is we really do have a lot of core knowledge about what it's going to take to get these lands restored. We know how to grow trees. We know how to plant those trees to get them to survive. We know how to protect the wildlife species. We know how to do all these things. And I think we just need to remind ourselves of that, because there will be those who question much of this every step along the way. The good news is we have success story after success story that we can point to, and you have a lot of them here in Tuolumne County. The Wrights Creek burn, 1950. Go back and look at those stands of trees that have been planted through good forestry efforts over time, and there's a forest there that people can now enjoy. Granite burn, the one that I worked on and cut my teeth in terms of learning how to plant. Now 40 years old. I think a lot of those trees are going to survive. Looks like a forest again. So we can rise up out of the ashes and create forests. And don't believe or let anybody tell you that you can't do it, because you can. So that's certainly one thing that's not broken. And I don't think it needs to be fixed. It just needs to be done. The other piece of this story is about you just can't make this stuff up. I think a lot of that gets to our regulatory approaches here in the state, where in a criminal sense, you're really not guilty. You're a presumed innocent. In the environmental sense, within the CEQA context, essentially you have to prove your innocence before you can move forward with whatever it is you want to do. And it really does lead to some very odd things. We have, and I have observed, requirements for truck drivers to stop their trucks, walk 500 feet of roads looking for frogs. Once they determine there are not any frogs, get back in the trucks and proceed at less than 5 miles an hour across the area. And a lot of these things really get into, you really can't make it up. And I do think as we look at trying to move forward in a lot of these things, we need to change how we think about our approachment and management of landscapes, because we have to get away from the presumption that anything we do out there has a potential to create bad outcomes, and get to the standpoint that what we're doing out there will result in a good outcome, and we're going to take care and address those things that potentially could be affected. That's a huge piece to push up the hill. Don't think we're going to get there anytime soon. But we really do need to think about how the society thinks about what we do out there, and have some thought about changing what they think about what we're doing. The third piece about this is kind of the old Nike saying, just do it. And one thing I've observed over time, a lot of people get caught up in worrying about things they can't necessarily change immediately. And they get so caught up by that, they kind of forget what it is they can be doing to make a difference. And I look at the Fire Safe Council, particularly the work that the Fire Safe Councils did adjacent to the community of Groveland and Pine Mountain Lake on the Crook Ranch, and recognized how effective that was in protecting that community from the fire. If that group of people hadn't stood up and identified something that they thought they could do, and had the perseverance to actually get the funding and undertake the project, it's likely that that would have been a much different outcome. So I think as each one of us looks at how we approach things, we need to remember that we have a core responsibility to get things done, and encourage all of you to look at the pieces of this you can get done and move forward with that, while at the same time trying to change the things that you know could make it easier for you to get done what you need to get accomplished. The other thing is just, there's a lot of things that need to be fixed out here. A lot of challenges that we face. I think if you think about 6 million acres of the forested landscapes of California that are under dire risk and threat from wildfire, 6 million acres is a huge piece of real estate. And as I look at the challenges there to getting that done, they fall into a whole bunch of different arenas. First of all is looking at the regulations. You know, what is it that keeps us from getting things done? And you know, in a lot of cases, I think we focus so much on planning for what we need to get done that we don't have any energy left to actually get it done when we're out there. So I think that's one piece. We need to look at this whole regulatory and statutory approach. I was glad to hear that the House of Representatives is looking at some bigger solutions to actually kind of dialing back a little bit of the planning that's necessary to even take a small step towards salvaging burned trees. As we look at other challenges, the amount of material, as Steve Brink talked about on these landscapes, you think about 6 million acres with an average of, Steve, you said 266 tons of biomass standing on them. If you actually could get the license to go out and begin the restoration work, what scope and scale would you have to undertake? How many acres would you have to treat each year in order to make a difference? I think the Forest Service, and Barney will talk about that, is looking at 500 to 600,000 acres per year. It's probably an equivalent amount on the private side. So if you think about 1 million to 1.2 million acres that need to be treated, where's the material gonna go? You know, I think probably all of us have witnessed the steady loss of sawmills, the steady loss of our biomass facilities, things that are core, and core to actually getting the work done. The other part of this is who pays. And I was heartened to hear at least some thought that, and I'm getting old enough, that when I first came to work, we used to pay money to the Forest Service for timber. And the Forest Service used that money to treat fuels, to do a whole bunch of things. It's almost like we've lost sight of the fact that there's value in the standing timber on the landscape that can be used to get the things done that we know need to be accomplished. So I think we need to think about how to change that around again so that we can look at, instead of investing taxpayer dollars and grants and subsidies in these landscapes, capturing some of the value that is there in the timber to allow us to do the restoration work that we need to do. That's a big thing to push up the hill. And you know, I'm glad there's some thought and discussion about that going on at the national level. Because as I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the arguments over lifting the debt ceiling for the country. You know, it's just astounding to me that we're talking in the $17 trillion is our current debt ceiling, and we're talking that we need to raise that to do what? To incur more debt. So where we have opportunities as a nation to look at the true values that we have and utilize some of that funding, utilize some of that value to accomplish things, I think we need to look at that closely and make sure that the decisions we're making are appropriate. The frustrating thing, I guess now that I'm only 3 months from retirement here, about a lot of this is that it's going to take a lot of dialogue, you know, to get us there. I think the good news is that I think they're, in a general sense, you know, the dialogue that I hear is a lot of stakeholders are recognizing we do have serious issues. They're starting to come to some agreement about what needs to be done. Not on everything, but certainly I think there's a lot of support for moving forward with a restoration strategy for the Sierras. So that's on the good news side. You know, I think there's still the challenges of What do we do with the material? Where do we take it? I think Dan kind of talked a little bit about, they're really going to be hard pressed to do much more than move their dead timber to their sawmill. So once we start wanting to take a lot more than what we've been using historically, we will need additional sawmill capacity. And as Dan pointed out, it's going to take more time to get that stuff put in place. What do we do with the small trees, that material that actually contributes to the burns? A lot of that is stored energy. I get into these discussions about photovoltaic panels and all these esoteric things that sometimes should cause me to go home at night and have a couple of drinks and go to bed. But, I've always pointed out that really trees are probably Mother Nature's answer to photovoltaic energy storage. Because as I do recall, when I lived here in Tuolumne County, I heated my house for probably 20 years with firewood. And the basic premise of that was you released that energy that was stored in that wood to provide heat. It is interesting that some people find that to be an odd concept, really. But it is a struggle when we think about how to convert all of that standing biomass, those small trees, into energy for some people. But I think it's going to be an important piece for us to get through, because that is and will be and should be a renewable energy source that people embrace and want to invest in for the future. So I think as we look at this whole thing, those last few issues are the kinds of things that are out there that we really do need to pay attention to. But they also require some sort of a champion to move forward with the issues that can have some influence on coming to solutions. And I'm glad to hear that Representative McClintock is certainly willing to take up a part of this. But I also share Dan's apprehension, given the political climate we live in these days. Can we actually come to a national solution that would allow us to set a target that said we're going to become wood independent in the United States? We are going to grow and utilize enough wood that we're not having to import wood from Canada, that we're not having to import wood from anyplace else. Clearly the capacity's there, but we need to have the national will to get that done. The other part of this is we think about importing, I don't know how many metric tons of wood pellets to Great Britain so they can use those wood pellets to generate energy for electricity and heat. I gotta believe that in the United States we could figure out some way that we could do just as well, and that we could use that stuff to create and meet our own energy needs, and that we don't have to watch those things being shipped across the ocean to a country who's figured it out. But I'm going to stop it there, because I'm going to get a little further in the weeds than I probably should be getting here. But I do think as you look at this, and I think TuCare as an organization, I think the success here has been really, you have been champions for coalescing around not only getting things done here locally, but also promoting your interests through champions like Representative McClintock to see what could get done to some of these bigger issues. You really can't, as individuals, control, but as a group collectively, you can start to push and push up the hill. And I know sometimes it feels like you're pushing sand uphill with a rake, but somebody's got to do that. And I'm glad that you as a group are willing to take the handle and put the sand at the face of the rake and see how much you can move. And I think what you find out after time is you may not move it all at once, but over time, if you keep at it, pretty quick, most of the sand starts to move in a direction that you think is worthwhile. So if you're patient enough and you stick at it long enough and you're dedicated enough, I think you can make a difference. And one thing about this group, I think from the time that Tom Latus formed it, and I hate to admit that's probably longer than I wanted to think about, this group is stuck together, and I really do appreciate the efforts over time, and hope you guys can stick together. And in the end, I think if you look at what's been accomplished, certainly there's been a lot that you can be proud of. But I'll stop at that point. Not a lot so much on restoration, just my opportunity to vent a little bit with a group and really think about moving forward. And I think there's a great will to move forward. There are opportunities to move forward. I just think you need to figure out how to prioritize those and focus and take what steps you can to do what you know is right. So that's it, Mike.
Really, really appreciate you being here with us, Barney. So let's welcome Barney Gann, U.S. Forest Service.
Good afternoon. Wow. Good afternoon. All right, there we go. So I want to say thanks to TuCare for giving me the opportunity to come and to spend some time with you today. I'm not going to take long. I know it's me and lunch, so we won't be long. But I'm going to give you some figures, and then I'm going to answer some questions from different people that were in the audience. So the lady back in the back that asked about how much private land was burnt in the fire, based on the numbers I have, is 23,711. How much did the fire cost? You might want to write this one down. $119 million. Next question, where does the money come from? The lady in the back asked this one too. That money comes from our budget. About a decade ago, fire suppression cost about 15% of our budget for the Forest Service. Today, it's over 50%. As we look at fire suppression across the entire country with the Forest Service, it's over $1 billion. $154,108 was on National Forest of the fire on the rim. Gentlemen, sir, you with the green shirt, you asked about corporate. So the reason I wasn't on the field trip yesterday, I was out with Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola invested in some meadow restoration over in Indian Valley, gave us $200,000. Coca-Cola signed a national MOU with the secretary, I think it was September the 13th. Coca-Cola wants to be water neutral. So they saw fit the importance of being able to invest in the watersheds upland, primarily the San Leandro Bottling Company. And so anyway, we were out yesterday looking at some work that we had done last year. So corporate America, I think we can challenge them to be able to invest back in a lot of the services and the resources that come off national forests. So it does exist. Someone talked a little bit about the amount of timber sold. At one time, Congress funded the Forest Service to cut 12 billion board feet off the national forest. Today, it's less than 3 billion. Steve, is that about right? That's what Congress funded us a while ago. 12 billion, about a decade, a little longer ago. Today, we're lucky if we get funded to cut 3. But there's some hope. You know, this is one of the first times I've been at a place to speak where I knew all the panel members. So I've been out with Dr. Bells, Dan Tomacheski and I visit quite a bit. Bill and I are at a lot of places together, and Steve and I visit quite a bit also. Here's what we're going to do. I think, you know, for most of the people that are here, what's the Forest Service going to do in relation to the RimFire? Just last night, the regional forester signed the bear request. That's the money that we request for emergency services out of the Washington office. I'm going to use words like approximate and close to because, I'm from the government, but approximately 4.3 million is what we're requesting from the Washington office just to do the emergency rehab on the RimFire. A little bit later this afternoon, if you see me dart out, I've got a meeting with Susan and her staff and the regional planners in the Washington office. We're going to look at how do we move forward really as quickly as we possibly can to get NEPA done. Our first priority is going to be along the roads. So Steve, your point on the hazard trees, is going to be the roads, trails, and administrative sites. That will be our first priority. Oh, I'm sorry, let me back up just a second. First priority is going to see about stabilizing the soil, getting ready for the winter rains and getting ready for the snowpack. That will be our first priority. Next, in conjunction, will be hazard trees. And then moving beyond that, we're going to move towards looking at salvage sales where it's possible and where it's feasible. Last year, as a result of the 2012 fires, we harvested a little over 72 million board feet of salvage sales. That may not sound like a big deal to you, but for us and the agency, salvage sales are extremely controversial, and being able to move forward with that much volume on salvage sales is huge for us. We're going to do the same as much as we possibly can on the RimFire where it makes sense. I want to touch just a little bit upon how do we move forward from here. As we look at California, the last time I checked, when the smoke rises, it knows no boundaries, nor do the fires, nor does insect and disease, nor does settlement movement. All of those issues affect all of us. And it's going to take all of us in order to see about making a difference on the footprint in California. Now, Dan Tomaszewski didn't mention this. I went to ask him permission if I could mention this, and this is what I'll tell you. About 2 years ago, Dan came to me and asked me, Barney, is there a way for us to work differently than what we're currently doing? Is there a way for us to work together to invest in reducing the fuels across the landscape versus the large fires or the large fires that escape and we end up battling each other in court with lawsuits? That's a no-starter. Nobody wins in the process of doing that. Steve mentioned it just a little bit. We're looking at the McCullamy watershed. We're going to look at that as a test place for us. How do we work together to do NEPA and CEQA all together, and we pitch in to do it versus all of us doing it independently. So CAL FIRE's on board, Sierra Pacific Industry, the Forest Service, the Conservancy, and many others are looking at how do we demonstrate that when we all come together and pool our resources, we can make a difference. Because currently, I want you to listen to this, I want you to make eye contact with me on this one. The no action alternative is not working. Now, Mike mentioned it a little earlier. He mentioned owl packs. Thank you for that. So on the severe fires, when it burns up, if you're really interested in either the northern spotted owls or the California spotted owls, whether it's fishers or goshawks, the next time it's going to be habitat, the next time, is going to be 80 to 120 years from now, at best, under the best conditions. That's if we get more forest back. That's the reality. So here's a piece that scares me. So I've got budget, I got timber, I got all the wildlife and fish, I got tribal relations. So here's the part that scares me, and the reason why I think it's important for us to invest some time. Who knows that Fisher may be listed in 2014? If you don't, you should. How many people know that California spotted owls are continually being petitioned to be listed? If you don't, you should. And if they get listed, do you know what that means? It gets dictated to how we manage. And that means a lot of flexibility on how we manage the landscape changes. So I think it's in our best interest to see about trying to front end load that, which means we put some energy and effort into that. Now there's a way to balance it, and we got to find a way to do it. Because what's working now is not working for us. When you look at the impact of threatened and endangered species, you look at the impacts to the communities, you look at the impacts of sedimentation. See, here's what it looks like indirectly. So if I look at a landscape and I got severe burns, I'm gonna have a hard time trying to stabilize the soil. So when the soil moves, where does it go? It goes to the streams and rivers, right? Have you guys counted how many reservoirs are in the Sierras? Take a look at a map. So when it goes from the streams and the rivers, it goes to the reservoirs, right? Let's nod on that one. Come on. Okay? So now when the sedimentation gets really full in the reservoirs, Bureau of Reclamation's got a couple choices. You spend millions of dollars to clean it out, or you put in a controversial proposal to raise the dam. Those are the kind of couple choices as I see them. For me, I'd much rather we talk about, well, how do we reduce the fuels so we don't have to worry about those severe fires, so you don't have to worry about sediment moving and then have to have those alternatives. And that's just one example. So if we put our brilliant minds together, we got research with Dr. Bales and others that know what the research is. Now, how do we start to gather our resources, be smart about where we put those resources, and we start to make a difference on the landscape? That's the question, because our current behavior is one that we need to change. Now, I'm personally encouraged. I've been in my job about a year, and I actually signed up for this job. Quit laughing. It's important to me. Okay, so now that I give you some facts, see about trying to tie it all together a little bit, now we'll open it up for questions. And remember, you guys are the ones who will dictate when you have lunch.
Bill Snyder had indicated that broke, don't fix it, and also indicated that we've got ways to do these things. And one of the things I've noticed in Forest Service recently is that I understand that many of the forestry type positions are held by non-foresters. And this has come to me by young foresters trying to work in the Forest Service saying, well, I'm working for a guy who's an historian doing forestry work. It doesn't make any sense, but he said that they're in the employment directions, it doesn't specify that foresters have to take those places. Can you give us some background on that? Because without foresters working on a lot of these jobs, you're going to have people without the proper background and experience.
So I'm going to ask you to put your rocks down and quit throwing at me, because I'm a fisheries biologist.
Well, I wouldn't expect a fisheries biologist to be working on a reforestation project in lieu of foresters. That's all I'm asking you. No, I respect what you are doing, and with all your background, you can deal with the greater picture. But why is it that we have keeping foresters out of forestry jobs that they used to be in the past? I was in the Forest Service some 35 years ago, and we were mostly foresters. And it's changed so much since then, and it was because of what I understand, particular employment directives that don't allow for foresters to be placed in forestry jobs.
So there's a couple of things that in my perception of my 22 years in the Forest Service. One, we used to do a little bit of everything when I started with the agency. So I did, even as a fisheries biologist, I planted trees, I did site prep. I actually supervised a timber crew when I was in the Ranger District. But I made it a point to learn about it. I think a part of what exists today is We look for leadership skills in a lot of positions, so we still have a lot of foresters. But at a point, you look for leadership. And so you're looking for people that have the skills of being able to collaborate, being able to get to talk to people and relate to people, to be able to move forward with a lot of things that we're doing. So there's still foresters. And, but at a point, so you got foresters that move up into leadership positions, and you also have other people in other specialty fields that move up too. But you're looking for people skills in most cases. Yes, ma'am.
You've got to find a way to get people involved through jobs. There's going to be a lot of job creation, maybe through this, volunteers, kids in schools, all kinds of people involved to get this reforestation or restoration on track. And I'm sure a lot of people, and especially kids, would like to get involved. Even CCC or the prisoners that can do it. A lot of people, they want to help some way, but we don't know how.
Yes, ma'am, and we appreciate that, and particularly for the RimFire, there are many people and organizations that want to volunteer their time, and there's others that are willing to and want to see about donating financial resources to be able to help. Susan Skowski, they're the forest supervisor here. She can help with how to make that happen, but we have sent some additional help up, looking at how do we see about trying to be able to factor in all those pieces and get as many people as we can involved with the restoration on the RimFire. And so, yes, ma'am, so I thank you for your input, and I'll personally sign you up for a volunteer when we get done in a minute. Yes, ma'am, in the back. We have engaged the Fish and Wildlife Service. Their mandate was listen critical habitat. When we looked at the northern spotted owl, we were engaged with them very closely. They had a mandate to move forward with that. But we had many conversations on how our management fits into that critical habitat and the recovery plan. And that's another. Most certainly. So typically, if you've got threatened or endangered species, when you have a wildfire, you do your suppression activities, and then you get a consultation or a biological opinion at the end. So the Fish and Wildlife Service doesn't stand in the way of you being able to do whatever suppression efforts you need, and then they just write you a biological opinion after the fact. And then that's what they use for future determinations on the effects on species. Dan and I, to be honest with you, in relation to some other things, we've met with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And that's another reason why we're working together, because our information is jointly is what determines, whether or not a species may be listed or not. And so it takes all that information that we all gather with monitoring, so we're doing that. Also, with the toad, potential listing of the toads, we're in the process of conferencing with them right now of looking at those activities that we're doing, and then that way if the toads or the amphibians are listed, we don't have to go back and do all the biological opinions that will be necessary. So I think the Fish and Wildlife Service, particularly in the last couple of years with my relationship with them, has come a long way with them understanding that there needs to be a need to manage on the national forest, because if not, we're not going to have the habitat.
So I'll try to keep this as a question and not a comment, but I appreciate your passion. I wonder if the Forest Service has given any thought to inviting our esteemed senators to view the devastated area, and maybe change their tune a little bit about how they vote, and have an understanding of when we have scorched earth, there is no habitat.
Have not gotten Senator Feinstein out. I know that Congressman McClintock and Randy, the regional forester, they flew the Fire Rocky, it was about 2 weeks ago maybe?
10 days
10 days ago, but we haven't gotten the senators out, but Congressman McClintock, and then we also, Randy Hanfeld, one of the county supervisors, also flew. That's a good comment. That's something that we need to see if we can make that happen.
Randy, you've spent 22 years with the Forest Service. This isn't the first forest fire that's ever happened in our country. Why does it take so long, and why do we keep returning the same reasoning and things that need to be done? We're the people that want things done. We're here because we want to support to get things done. But the Forest Service and the people in Washington, D.C. with the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife and our elected officials are the ones that can make things happen. We can write letters, and we will support, but why can't the top officials in these organizations go to Congress and make the things happen that need to be done that we all sit here and talk about?
So as an agency, go ahead and let that clap, go ahead. We can't lobby. As an agency, we can't lobby, but we can very strategically answer questions when we're asked. So that's where we are. And then as an agency, we're doing what Congress asks and funds us to do in any given year. And so I think a part of it, I think you got to try to remember this, or at least this is important for me. If I'm looking at forestry issues in California or national forest issues, that doesn't mean a lot to me in Connecticut. That doesn't mean a lot to me in New Jersey. It doesn't mean a lot to me in New York. It may not mean a lot to me in Georgia. So when you look at Congress and when they, in the process of the laws, is they have to have all of their counterparts virtually across the country voting for those same laws. And so if you're in an urban environment, that issue may not resonate with you. And so I think that's one of the challenges. I think, Dan talked about it a little earlier, is that, really being realistic on what you will and won't be able to do legislatively. And that's just the reality piece. I mean, so what we typically do is when we are asked questions, then we try to be as truthful as we possibly can on the impacts of the laws that are passed, with trying to be in these communities, with employment, communities being threatened, water quality, threatened endangered species, the list goes on and on. But that's just the place in which we are as a federal agency. Yes, sir, in the back.
I have a question. You mentioned something about you needed to do NEPA documents before you be shovel ready.
Yes.
That's correct, right?
Yes.
Is there any way the Department of Agriculture can sidestep that? It seems to me that the Stanislaus has had more NEPA documents done over the last 30 years. You can't use historical documents to meet the needs. Wait 3 months before you can put a shovel down.
When you do a NEPA document, it has what we call a shelf life. And in most cases, it's 5 years, because after then you're looking at change conditions. So even if you try to use that, you would still have to at least provide some kind of rationale on whether or not the situation is still current or it's changed. So after about 5 years, NEPA is considered what we call stale. And then we do have category exclusions that we can use. And at one time, category exclusions were not appealable. You could just be able to make a decision and be able to go and do what you wanted to do. We no longer have that ability. So now, even with the category exclusions we have, the public still is able to make comments on those, and they are appealable. So it's changed over the last couple of years.
So if I'm hearing you right here, you still got to go through the process, which will take time. And if you don't, another environmental group might just do a sue and settle lawsuit and shut this thing down so the trees rot.
It might. And you remember I was talking about those leadership skills just a little earlier? And that's one of the things that's really important for us, is that You've got to be able to communicate with people and bring people together. Because many of the issues that we're dealing with, most of us are already value laden. And, it takes us getting together and talking about it. And, and trying to bring people to the table to be able to try to move forward. It's what I call you got to have skin in the game, which means that not everybody's going to get exactly what you want. But if we can all get a little bit, then that will make a big difference for us.
One thing you might ask the board supervisor, since the travel management plan is put into play, some of that needed stuff, especially concerning that comment earlier today about getting the roads open, perhaps that TMP document would suffice. And at the same time, get those roads open, I agree with you. Thank you for your passion.
Barney, a question about a couple of facilities we have here that really deal more with the non-commercial products, the power plant, and we've got a wood shavings plant, and there's going to be millions of tons of that needs to be removed. Do you foresee maybe within a year that there'll be funding to go back to some service contracts that can help remove that product and get it to those facilities?
Depends on how much value is going to be in that material. So what we're going to do is over the next year is really look at, and what I'll talk to Susan and the other staff about a little later today is we'll have two processes. One, probably do an EA for all the hazard tree work in along roads, trails, and administrative sites. What I think is that will not be as controversial. What we typically try to do is couple that with salvage sales. I think if we separate those out, I think that, we can begin to move forward as quickly as we can on the EA. And then I think we'll move a little bit quicker with the hazard tree removal. And then the other pieces then will begin too on the salvage piece. And then we'll take a look at that material. And then if there is enough value to be able to move that material, and if there's value left over, then we'll see about trying to invest that back into the site, maybe using stewardship contracts, if that authorization is approved, if we go back to work.
Over the years, TuCare has been involved in a collaborative effort with the Forest Service and all. One of the things that's really been impressive is the landscape maps that have been developed. In that context, the pre-planning that is done for fire suppression, fire response, friends are working in that department, and it's really impressive. One of the things that came up in the collaborative discussions was the possibility of pre-planning the restoration. We know every year we're going to have fires, we know that lightning strike hits on July 16th, and the humidity is a certain level, we have instant response. We need to get that kind of pre-planning set up for the restoration, because we know it's going to happen every year. But there seems to be no motion. And if that was pre-primed and ready to go, then we can go to work instead of having that as a delay.
I think in the collaborative piece in the process with working with the forest, for me, I think there should be a way to talk about, the future projects, working with, the county or the different townships on where the priorities are with the fuels, so you got the WUI, and you also need to decide where are those other areas that are being a priority, where you be strategic about where you put your energy and effort at. And I think if you'll sit down and work with the forest, I think that's a way to do it, because most forests, and in most cases, will have like a 5-year plan on what they're looking at on doing their vegetation, which is fuels is a part of that. So I think maybe if you sit down with Susan and maybe their fire management officer and their other vegetation folks, you should be able to factor that in and see about trying to sketch out a strategy on what you think is important.
Great plan, but we need to do that same thing towards salvage and restoration ahead of time, so we're not waiting this year and a half before.
Yeah. The only piece on the salvage is that's a responsive piece. And so really where we want to spend our time is what we're talking about on this all lands piece, is where do we invest on the front end so we don't have the fires? Because all salvages is just trying to respond to what's already happened.
Irregardless, we're going to have fires every year, so we know we need to have that.
Most certainly. We know that in this landscape in California, we're going to have fires. I mean, we've gone beyond the trend, so we know it's going to happen. So how do we be smart about where we do stuff on the landscape?
I'm Bert Maxwell. They appreciate the firefighters and all they've done and how all the agencies came together, and it was great. However, I got a peek at it yesterday on the tour, and it gave me an idea of the scope, and I had agreed that if, as of this instant, this RimFire area had been in private ownership, that would make $1 billion difference over the next decade. How soon could that possibly happen?
How soon could we start cutting? Is that your question?
Well, for instance, how much acreage does the forestry control in the western states compared to the size of the RimFire? This could be a model prototype of how to change the whole system by privatizing the whole works except for obviously parks, roads, and dams, and build more dams and have irrigated areas, have small forest plantations that are manageable, and they will optimize their usage much quicker and more effectively than you ever could. Thank you.
So I don't know what the acreage is of national forest west of the Mississippi, but in California it's 20 million acres.
20 million, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
Pardon me, it's hard for me to stand and talk at the same time.
Okay.
I am the managing director of the California Off-Road Vehicle Association. On behalf of the off-highway and off-road vehicle community, I talked to Susan earlier, we're starting a stakeholders group to volunteer and help restore roads, trails, areas, whatever we can do, because we want to give back to the community. It gives us so much. But a lot of the policies you're talking about, we've been fighting against for a very long time. And our efforts have been stymied by every listing, potential listing. We fight against all of them. We are fighting against the fraud. We fight against everything that we can. And you're right, the Forest Service, there are some great people who work for the Forest Service. I absolutely admire them, but their efforts are stymied too by those organizations that choose, instead of talking, to sue. Now, we just had one process, and I was part of it, where in the El Dorado, we managed to withdraw all the appeals, so there will be no lawsuit. I was one of the appellants. I was very proud to come together, but I don't see that collaborative process working very often. And I find that our policies, and I don't know what to do about it, that's why I'm turning to you, because it's a heck of a fight. We've been fighting for years. We have policies out of Washington, D.C., like travel management, that make no sense. They don't translate to the ground. And we don't lobby in Washington, D.C., because we're little, tiny people who don't have a whole lot of money. But there are organizations that are very big and have a lot of money, and they lobby very successfully, and that's where we get these policies. So what can we do?
Well, Dan Tomaszewski is a good buddy of mine, and I'm with Dan in a lot of places. And here's one where I think I am. This is Barney speaking. Collaboration is, I think it's important for us to try that and in a good faith effort to be able to try to bring people together. But as I mentioned before, there are some issues whereas it's just really hard to bring people together based on their value set. And then when those times come, I think, those things that we think are right as an agency to move forward with, then I think that we should. And then whatever the process is, whether it's appeals or litigation, be okay with people that want to do that. Because I oversee appeals and litigation too. So I see it all. I see it all from diameter limits, water quality, northern spotted owl, fisher, black-backed woodpecker. I see all of those things. So that's what leads me to say, okay, how can we get ahead of this? How can we change this? So the piece of that is trying to work with people. But in most cases, if we're at odds value-wise, I think at some point in time we get a cut and fish bait and realize that we may not get to the same place based on our values. And then if we end up there, be okay with letting the process run its course. So I'm going to encourage you to continue to look at doing your trail work and volunteering. Don't give up on that piece.
Oh, no, we don't give up ever.
Okay.
We're really, really stubborn.
Yeah, and then also be involved. You know, in many cases when we propose projects, most people who agree with those remain silent. And so what we're posed with is when we're looking at the comments that we receive from the public, is typically people that are in opposition. So your voice, whether it's a quick email, I like that, I support that, us having that is way more value than what you may think. Because then we've got to factor that in and try to look broadly. Like I suggest strongly to county supervisors that, you know, you need to weigh in on what those projects may mean, what it may mean to you economically, so you have a voice. If you don't reply, then you don't have a voice. And then what happens is that you're on the receiving end of what happens. And that's the reality piece. For me, I'd much rather tell you something and you tell me no versus me never engage at all. So Mike, the gentleman back with his arms crossed, and then there's another gentleman standing back there. Can I at least get those two? But they're standing in the way of lunch, right? Okay, go ahead. I haven't started to get into the details on that, sir, to be honest with you. But what I'm going to recommend is that we look at every avenue that we currently have. One of the things that is a concern for me is that we got to get the soil stabilized. And so we need to be as quick as we possibly can with being able to do that piece. And then also, in moving forward with the hazard trees. So whatever avenues, I think what we'll do is, as Susan works with our contracting officers, is we look at every tool and every avenue we possibly can to hire and get people working, and then looking at opportunities on how we can incorporate those local resources into doing a lot of those jobs as many as we possibly can. I don't know the answer to that, in particular to RIM. Typically, the resource areas I have is once it's all out, then folks look over to our area on now what? Now what are you going to do? But as far as the decisions, as far as the suppression and the tactics and things like that, I don't know, because I'm not involved with that, and so if I tried to guess at that, I'd be misleading you.
Okay, I'm going to invoke the power of the MC and ask the last question. And this is, then we're going to go to you. But I got to ask this one. and it's a question probably for you to answer as an opinion, not a fact. But you mentioned, Barney, that you said salvage logging is difficult and controversial, you said. Why is it? Why is cutting down dead trees, in your opinion, controversial?
I think a part of it is when we typically talk about salvage, it's typically taught in value. The first place we typically go to is that we want to go and we want to retrieve the value of what's left. You know, we had it was a plantation, it was an investment that we made at some point in time, so we want to make sure or try to recoup as much of our investment as we possibly can. So I think that's a piece of it. In a lot of places, you know, that's one of the reasons why I think that salvage needs to be broken out separately from your hazard. I mean, so if you got roads, trails, and administrative sites, you want to make those safe. I think that's an easier argument to make. But if I've got a stand that's maybe quite a ways off the road and it's just there, I think that's harder. And then it's a value set. Many people don't think, one, that we should be cutting timber. Another piece of that is that many people don't think that we should be selling timber off the national forest. And so many are like, hey, let the natural processes take their course. And so if it burn up, then let it regenerate naturally or just whatever the situation may be. So I don't know that there's one excellent answer. I just think that it's complex, and I think many people just disagree with it philosophically on whether or not you should salvage or not.
Very, very well. Thank you, Barney. Again, that was a great presentation. He answered those questions well, and we're glad you're leading the charge, Barney. I know it's lunchtime. I know people want to go. I'm going to say a couple things briefly. Number one, yes, sir.
Was the Park Service invited to participate in this?
I don't know if the Park Service was invited. Melinda, are you still here? Yeah, were they invited to participate, the Park Service? No, I guess not. We'll get them next time, yeah. But first of all, I want to say that it's kind of playing on what you just asked. The people we just heard from, they are the very best in their field in this state. You just got to hear from the very best people in the different particular fields you heard from in the state of California. And I'm going to go back to somebody I honored earlier. Melinda Fleming put this all together. And she really, really deserves applause. Yeah. And I'm going to end with this. Been a lot of sawmills shut down in California over the years. There's also been a lot of TuCares in California shut down over the years. There used to be 11 or 12 TuCare type groups in California. They're called Alliances for Resource and the Environment, ARE. And they came in the form of We Care, We Share, other names. TuCare is, I think, either the last one standing, or maybe there's one more. And yet, TuCare can still have a forum and get the quality people that you just heard from to come talk to us about our natural resources. We're not going to be able to keep going without your help, without your membership. There's a membership brochure on every seat. If you're not a member of TuCare and you want to see this kind of forum continue, you want to hear these kind of folks come talk to us about our resources, please join us. TuCare, there's an A in there and it stands for Alliance. And that's what we are. We're an alliance of people, local folks that we care. So join us if you will. Thank you very much for being here. See you next year.